IB Nation, welcome back to another episode of the Irish Breakdown Podcast brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Happy Wednesday, everybody. It's middle of the week. We're about halfway through another week of the offseason, and we're keeping up with our State of the Program series today. And today, we're talking about wide receivers, which I know is going to be a very, very interesting discussion because, Brian, it feels like the last couple of seasons, it's been the year that the wide receivers are going to have a big year, but there's things that we've seen this offseason that lead us to believe that they're on the verge of taking that next step and they're finally starting to come around. So in part one of today's show, we're going to dive around what we've seen in the spring and go from there. And then part two, we're talking about what questions still remain, because not all questions were answered for any position group this spring for Notre Dame. And then part three, we're going to be talking about the future. What do they have to do to continue building this room for years to come? And we're going to wrap everything up today with a mailbag dedicated to the wide receivers. So it could be about current, past, future wide receivers at Notre Dame, questions you have around college football with wide receivers. It's going to be a fun one, man.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's like, okay, I feel like we've been here before. I feel like this is the annual, this is the year the receivers finally figure it out show. Like that's the thing. Like last year it was the arrival of Malachi Fields and Jaden Greathouse, and it's going to be so good. And Malachi Fields, I think, was everything I hoped he'd be. When they targeted him, he was pretty good. And I feel, and I feel like some conversation I had is that was going to ramp back up when they got to the postseason. Like his targets in the first couple games were a little different than maybe later in the year, because I think there were different things that they were kind of working on later in the year, and that would have ramped back up here in the postseason had they made the postseason. But obviously, we saw him be good. We saw Jordan Faison break out, and then Jaden Greathouse gets hurt and wasn't really getting targeted then. And I like a lot of things that Mike Brown has done at Notre Dame, and we're going to have an interesting conversation about him. But like that's the most probably frustrating thing we've seen from him so far was his kind of push of Will Pauling over Jaden Greathouse last year, and it just didn't see the group we thought we were going to see just out of health. We thought we were going to have a really nice veteran 4-man duo to roll with. And we expected Micah Gilbert to really, break into the rotation. And just a lot of those things didn't necessarily happen. 24, I don't know that I went into the season thinking it was going to be an elite group, but man, I really thought we were going to get a lot more from Chris Mitchell. And I thought Bo Collins might be able to raise his game. And I actually feel bad for Chris Mitchell, because I still to this day think Chris Mitchell could have been a really nice player at Notre Dame in a different year. Like if he was here in he came at like the worst time for a player of his skill set. If he'd have been here in 23 with Sam Hartman or 25 with CJ Carr, I think Chris Mitchell has a very different 1 year at Notre Dame. Very different 1 year. He just happened to come into a year where you had a different type of quarterback, heck of a quarterback, but different type, that didn't really throw the ball great in areas where Chris Mitchell was going to thrive. And so, so that year you didn't see the breakout. Bo was a solid player. Bo was exactly at Notre Dame what he was at Clemson, a nice, good, solid player that had some great, like we'll look at Bo Collins, numbers and be like, he was all right. But I'll always remember Bo for being like kind of money in the big moments, like the catch against Texas A&M on the late touchdown drive, the touchdown pass against Georgia, things like that. Kind of like Malachi. If you look at Malachi's numbers, his catches per game, yards per game were all better against ranked teams than it was against non-ranked teams. Like money player. But, 24 wasn't the year we maybe thought it was going to be at receiver. 23, I'm ready for the Tobias Merriweather breakout. And, man, let's see what they do with Chris Tyree at wide receiver. And come to find out, they didn't really do a whole lot with Chris Tyree at receiver outside of just, having him be a normal slot receiver. And Tobias just never kind of comes into his own. He had some flashy big plays, but just couldn't put it all together. And, 22, it just was not good. I don't know that any of us thought it was going to be a great year at receiver, but we're crossing our fingers. And I really hope Deion Colsey and Lorenzo Styles are ready to break out, in 2022. And, 2021, we did get the Kevin Austin breakout, but man, Kevin Austin and a healthy Braden Lindsey, and then we get into the year and Braden Lindsey's not healthy and not being utilized, and Kevin Austin has his moments, but it's been a while since we're like, man, this is a heck of a receiving core. I think you could argue probably since 2018, 2019 to a degree, but I think that was more of a receiver and a tight end as your 1-2 punch that year. You had a great individual receiver in Chase Claypool, but like the unit as a whole wasn't necessarily dynamic. And so it's been a minute since we've been able to say, boy, this receiving room is a reason they're winning a bunch of games against good teams. And it'd be nice to see that. It'd be really nice to see that. Because like 2018, we knew game one, like, all right, Miles Boykin is going to do this season what he did in the bowl game. I mean, first half, he makes that big catch down the sideline against Michigan. He catches a big touchdown pass that gets called back because, the tight end was misaligned, and he didn't see it and back off. But like you just kind of saw first game, like Chase is making plays after the catch. I think there was like a third down catch. Remember, Chase catches a little crossing route and, runs for first down. And you're like, yep, they're going to be pretty good. It's just been a minute since it's been there. It hasn't been a minute since we've talked about it being the year it's going to be there. And I think that's what makes this kind of an interesting conversation, because it's like rinse, repeat. This is the year that the Notre Dame receivers finally, become this, and this. And so it's going to make for an interesting conversation. But at the end of the day, Trev, sorry, y'all. That's how I feel about this group. I just feel like it's a group that has the talent to be really, really good. Yes, it's got to prove itself. The one thing that's different about this group from all the other groups we've seen in the past is we're not sitting here hoping that one or two guys break out, and if they don't, they're in trouble. That's what this spring showed us is very different about this receiving core compared to some of those others.
Agreed. And I think where that conversation has to start is with the guy up top, Brian, and that's Mike Brown, the wide receivers coach at Notre Dame. Obviously, along with a couple of other assistants in there, Sean Shivers, who's over now, and he's helping out with the room, because at the end of the day, when you have like 15 scholarship receivers, it's a really hard task to have to be able to coach all 15 of those guys by yourself. So I'm happy that they made that coaching adjustment. But Mike Brown, he's going into his third year in South Bend. I think his like first day on campus was Bo Collins' like visit, when he was visiting from Clemson before he officially committed to Notre Dame in the transfer portal. But he's a very interesting coach to follow, and where it starts with Mike Brown is he's a coach that over the recent years, he's gotten a lot of flack. And we kind of have to ask the question, should he? Now, I think that's an interesting place to start this, man, when you start talking about Notre Dame's wide receivers.
Yeah, I understand, because I know I've been around this a long time. I've been on message boards for a while. I've been doing this, covering the team since 2010, which means all but the 2 years I got back into coaching, I've had to be part of message boards for it. And I understand why fans are the way they are. If a coach makes an early recruiting mistake, it really doesn't matter what else he does. Unless he turns around in a major way, he's just going to get criticism. And that's kind of how I feel like Mike Brown is at, right? He's just kind of he's that whipping boy on staff who you're going to look silly criticizing Mike Denbrock, because Notre Dame's, we had a little interesting conversation, for example, yesterday on X. My guys at Crane and Cone had some, young high school coach on who does like, analysis of schemes, and he named his top 5 play callers. And of course, it's all the guys that do like creative stuff. And I was like, here's the list of offensive coordinators that in the last 3 years have had a top 5 scoring offense and a top 5, have had 2 top 5 scoring offenses and 2 top 5, yards per play averages. Mike Denbrock, and that's the list. That's the entire list. And he's not in that top 5, right? Like Notre Dame fans, some who like to be, contrarian will be critical of Mike Denbrock. And I think some fans who like the pizzazz, they like the substance or the style over substance, will think he's not a good play caller. Because I get that's kind of where it is. But like overall, most people accept the fact that Mike Denbrock's really good. And you look at Joe Rudolph, and while we can have some question marks about his coaching, he's a dynamic recruiter. And Gino Guidugli's got, this is a big year for him to prove something, but he's a dynamic recruiter. And the reality is if you're a really good coach, but not an elite recruiter, then people are going to think you're not a great coach. And I think that Mike Brown's done a nice job recruiting, especially the way they finished last year. And I think he's been a really good coach. I don't agree with everything he's done, but I think overall he's been a very good coach. We rarely talk about just nonstop, this route technique sucks, that route technique sucks. What do I focus on? I still need more urgency off the ball, and I need to compete for the ball better. Outside of that, there's a lot to like about the way his players compete, the way they run routes, the way that they block. We have had some issues with, like, okay, they're taking some plays off, but I think that's because of the depth, the lack of depth. Well, they just haven't trusted guys. We could agree or disagree with that, but like the point is, we can nitpick things about the job Mike Brown's done, and I do think that hopefully this year some of those areas are improved, because all coaches are just like players. There's always areas you can get better. But I don't think Mike Brown gets enough credit for what he's actually done as the wide receivers coach, which has completely changed the culture of that room. And he's also been able to come in and add talent. And we saw his freshman class, which did not get a lot of love. You're right. I mean, nobody was ranked as a top 100 recruit coming out of high school by the national services. Caden Finley wasn't. Bubba Frazier wasn't. Devin Fitzgerald wasn't. There's a lot of people that criticize. You got a lot of solid players, but, you can't go get the big dogs. And, I mean, I don't know, Trev. First semester on campus, I think that group looked like they're pretty flipping good. So, I mean, now we look at the 2027 class. We'll talk about that later today. He's got a chance to land kind of one of those elite players. Like, I think he's done a pretty good job. And then, of course, in the portal, they've been able to go out and get some real good receivers we've talked about. So I do think Mike Brown, there's certainly areas. No coach is perfect. And until you win a title, nobody's going to be, above criticism from Marcus Freeman on down. But critiquing certain aspects doesn't mean that overall, on the whole, you're not doing a really good job. And I think that after some shaky early recruiting, I don't think was all Mike Brown's fault. There was this war between the coaching staff and the recruiting staff, and under the previous regime, where the coaches wanted certain guys, the recruiting staff wanted other guys, which just created a mess. But I think he settled in. He's finding his role, and he's done a really nice job coaching this group up. So that's something that gives me a little bit of confidence that I think the group that's on the field will be very well prepared on how to play. The hope now is, will he expand the depth chart beyond like 4 guys? And really, last year was really 3 after the 4th game. Like, they'd get KK Smith and Micah Gilbert just enough reps to give the other guys a breather, but it was 3 guys dominating the reps. And when somebody needed a breather, they'd do it with 12 personnel, more so than another receiver for chunks of the season. Yeah, that's something that I hope changes. But overall, I feel like you've got someone in place that's going to be able to coach this group up and to some level get the talent to turn into production.
Mike Brown is a very interesting coach to talk about. I'm with you. I do think that he gets overhated because somebody has to end up being the whipping boy. For some, that's going to be Mike Denbrock. For a large constituent of people, that's not Joe Rudolph, even though there's plenty of blame to go around the table in the offensive coaching staff room. There is. I'm in an interesting spot with Mike Brown. I feel very similar to him going into this year, how I felt about Gino Guidugli going into last year. Whereas, like, you got a lot to show me. That doesn't mean that you've done a bad job up to this point. That's just simply you have a lot to show me. Because in Gino Guidugli's first years in South Bend, it's like, okay, you get Sam Hartman, somebody with a lot of experience who, for a multitude of different reasons, regressed in some areas as a passer. You bring over Riley Leonard for one reason or another. There were aspects of his game that took a step back as a passer when he was, in that room. And the 2 guys that we were the most excited to see start, CJ Carr and Kenny Minchie, weren't recruited by Gino Guidugli. And so it's like, okay, so like, where are we at now here? Like, I need to see a lot from Gino. And it was then what he did on the recruiting trail, flipping Blake Hebert from Clemson. And then obviously what he's done recently. I just had an article out about it. So I'm not shy about when I feel like I'm criticizing somebody, but then I'm also not shy about going back and like, like I said, it was a prove it year. And he went out and proved it to me with how CJ Carr played, with how Steve Angeli played, with what he's done on the recruiting trail. So okay. He's
going to have developed 3 Power 4 starting quarterbacks this year.
Right. I mean,
it's pretty good.
And so, yeah, that ain't too shabby. And so that's how I feel about Mike Brown going into this year.
Yeah. Would you agree that Mike Brown and Joe Rudolph are both kind of walking into that kind of prove it years? Whatever you think about what they've done, good or bad, like, this is the year where, whether you're a supporter of them or a criticizer of them, that this is the year that one side is going to be proven right or wrong. Like, this is the determination year. This is the one where it's like, okay, dude, you've been here now. Every kid on the roster except portal guys can coached by you. Like, this is the year where anyone that's basically criticizing him after this year is just a hater. So, to use a very, like, I don't know, like kind of social media way of describing it. Or it's the other way where anyone praising him is just a blind homer who's unwilling to criticize Notre Dame coaches. Like, this is the year where I feel like there's going to be no more questions about who Mike Brown is. It'll be just like normal things. Like, hey, I think Mike Denbrock's one of the 3 or 4 best offensive coordinators in college football. Are there things that I wish he would do differently? Of course, we have opinions. That's why we do shows. But you can also say that and acknowledge that he's still awesome, but he's not perfect. Neither am I, neither's Trev. I think this is that year for Mike Brown. And a lot of it's because of just, dude, if you can't get this room going, then maybe the people that are always on you all the time are right. But at the same time, if you get this room going, you can't just dismiss the work by saying, well, it's a talented 100%. Room. Yeah, it's a talented but very unproven room that needed coaching. It needed to be steered in the right direction. So you can't just dismiss and say, well, of course he could do that. Look at all the talent he had. I think this is sort of that year. It's going to be that I don't know if I'd say prove it year. I think a better way of explaining it is I'm trying to think of the right way to say this, Trevor. It's a determinative year. It's the year that will tell us who he is. It'll be the telling season. It'll be the one that it'll be defining. That's the word I'm looking for. It'll be the defining season of Mike Denbrock's career. Mike Brown's career at Notre Dame.
Yeah, agreed. I think Mike Brown and Joe Rudolph are going into the same year. How I look at it is, okay, you've done a good job up to this point. But if your goal is to win a national championship as a program, as a coaching staff, as a team, there are times where good just doesn't cut it. Good gets you to where you've been at. Good gets you to the spot where we talk about if you fix this, and this, and you continue to build on this, and this, then you'll be a championship contending team. Well, now is the year to go out and be that championship contending team. And if you're not able to do that with this room, then it's like, okay, you have now taken this room as far as you can take it. Barring, the coach just letting you hang around until maybe one day you figure it out. That's how I view it with him. I'm with you. I do think it's going to be a defining year for him. But you mentioned it, Brian. The level of talent in this room is such where there are going to be some people, if they take that next step, they're going to try to dismiss Mike Brown. That's something that I don't agree with, and I've been a critique of his. But also, with that being said, the level of talent in this room and watching their progression throughout the spring is one of the reasons why we do feel better about the wide receivers coming out of spring. I think that's one thing that we're also confident.
Yeah, I just think the big thing is, Trev, is as we kind of wrap up this kicking off the part one of the show is the margin for error is so much greater now. That's really what it comes down to. We're not sitting here saying if Milin Graham doesn't step up, this team is in trouble. Or as much as I want Jaden, let's just pull up the depth chart to kind of get a sense of it, Trev. It's not like, hey, if Jaden Greathouse can't get healthy, Notre Dame's in trouble. They're just not going to be able to be that team we hope they can be if he doesn't, insert, this guy stepping up. And yeah, you're going to be better if Jaden Greathouse is healthy, but it's not going to prevent you from being a championship caliber unit. So like in a world where, let's say, Milin Graham, Jaden Greathouse, Micah Gilbert, Logan Soldate, and say Devin Fitzgerald all go down, they've got a season-long flu, can't play. You still have Jordan Faison, Elijah Burris, Bubba Frazier, Caden Finley, Quincy Porter, Cam Williams, Jerome Bettis Jr. You know what I mean? Like, there's still a lot of talent there, even if you have 5 guys go down for whatever reason. What are the odds that happens? Like, as much as Notre Dame's had injuries in recent years, that it hasn't been that bad. And that's the difference, Trevor, with this group, is there's so much talent that you're like, okay, they're at least going to be solid there. And that's assuming 2 guys get hurt. But I would argue that this is the deepest 2 deep, one of the deepest 2 deeps, if not 3 deeps in the country. What's different between Notre Dame and other top receiving corps, Ohio State's, Oregon's, even Texas and teams like that, is there's not that proven dog in the room. right? Yeah, you could say Cam Coleman still has to, develop and grow and improve because he was just a sophomore last year. But, Cam Coleman is still a guy that's learning and developing, is still a 56 catch, 708 touchdown or 708 yard, 5 touchdown guy as a true sophomore with terrible quarterback play. You know what I mean? What would a guy like Cam Coleman do in an offense where he's got CJ Carr throwing the ball? Well, we're going to kind of find out this year at Texas with Arch Manning throwing him the football. They don't have a Jeremiah Smith. Well, not many people do. I think Auburn's the only other team you could say they might. There isn't a Malachi Toney that we know of, right? There isn't that known commodity like that. And overall, a lot of this is projection with a lot of talented players. And I think that's why you can't put Notre Dame, if we're talking about ranking rooms, you can't say they're the best receiver room in the country because look at how much numbers they have. Yeah, you can make a case that they might be the deepest, but you can't rank them ahead of some other rooms that have more proven players. So when we do our top 10 receiver rooms this year, I will have Notre Dame in my top 10. And I will argue that they have a case to be in the top 5 because of talent. But what you're going to see is they rank a little bit lower because there's so much projection left in this room. But the other side of that conversation, though, is what are the odds that none of these guys pan out to some degree? And I think that's where my optimism comes from.
Without a doubt, man. I'm with you. So let's dive into some of that individual talent here in the room and talk about what we learned this spring. And it starts with arguably the closest thing that Notre Dame has to that certified dog returning back in the room, and that's Jordan Faison, somebody who elected to forego playing lacrosse, a team that right now that's, I believe, the rankings just came out for their bracket. They're a number 2 seed in the lacrosse tournament. And so
number 2 overall seed. Yep.
Right.
They'll play the winner of the Richmond. Oh my goodness. I think it's, let me see here. I actually made a post about it on the premium board or on the free page. So just a quick note for all of you that for whatever reason can't or don't want to sign up for the premium board. If you go to irishbreakdown.com, there's a free message board down at the bottom, the community page that you can take a peek at. But they'll play the winner of the Robert and Morris Jacksonville game. And then if they win that one, they'll play the winner of I think it's Johns Hopkins and Cornell. So, yeah, they were the number 2 overall seed. Princeton was the number 1 overall seed.
Gotcha. Well, we're talking about a player who elected to forego playing on a team that has another chance at winning a national title in lacrosse, focus on football this year. And I think that paid off major, major dividends because the question going into spring, Brian, was, does Jordan Faison have another level to him? And if he would have stuck with lacrosse, I don't know if that question would have gotten answered in the spring. It would have been okay, we see him at a practice here, we see him at a practice there, but while he's in season in lacrosse, that's going to take precedent. So if he has a game, when Notre Dame has a practice, he's at the lacrosse game.
Right.
So with him focusing on solely football this offseason and this spring, I think we got that question answered, man.
Yeah, I think when I look at Jordan Faison, there's 2 levels of this conversation. One is, hey, bro, just do what you did last year at the minimum and we're good. Right? Just if you just repeat last season, I will consider Jordan Faison's 4th and final season at Notre Dame a success. Because of, there's a lot of reasons why we, need to get into all of them. We've talked about it before, but if he just goes out there again this year and has 49 catches for 640 yards and 4 touchdowns, 3.1 yards per catch, I'm happy. That's going to make an impact. I mean, he did that on an offense that set a program record in yards per play and scoring last year. You can be good with that type of production. And the other thing about Jordan Faison last year that doesn't show up on his stat sheet is he is a way better blocker than I ever thought he was going to be because he's not big. I guess if you think about it, he's a lacrosse player, so I probably should have assumed he had a little bit more scrappiness to him than you normally, a converted high school quarterback that's 5'9.5", 5'10". But yeah, he's probably a little taller than that. But the question, though, Trev, is okay, but is there another level for him? I don't need him to take it to another level, but just because I don't need it doesn't mean I don't want it or that it wouldn't be impactful. And so when you look at Jordan Faison, you say, okay, can he take it to another level? And What he showed this spring is he's got the chops and he's got the tools to take it to another level. Part of that is going to be what the coaching staff does with him, but the other part of it is him. So what did Jordan Faison do this spring to make us think he has another level? Well, number one, I think he looked more explosive. I think being able to focus on football workouts, because here's the thing about football only. Twofold. One, he's at all the practices. So his technical game improved. He did more things this spring to show an ability to get some separation as a route runner. He showed more of a feel for getting open, Trev. Like there was a play, a 3rd and 9 conversion he made where he comes off the ball and he's coming off hard, but he sees that the defense is bailing. So he immediately turns back to the ball like with his eyes and is like, okay, and throttles down once he gets to the sticks because he knows, I know where CJ is going to throw this football. He's going to throw a rope past the sticks in front of the defense, and that's exactly what happened. Like CJ and Jordan were just on this link where like they both knew in this situation, this is where the ball is going. I don't know that we always saw that from Jordan Faison in the past, partly because him and the quarterback were not necessarily as, far along in that relationship as they could have been. There was times last year that CJ was late with them. Times he was, you could just tell early on, especially that Jordan wasn't as comfortable with CJ as maybe you would hope. You think of the drop against Texas A&M where he just didn't shoot his hands at the right time. And there's a lot of those type of aspects to his game, but you look at him this spring and they're just on a wavelength, the two of them. That's not happening if Jordan's playing lacrosse. His technical proficiency is not improving if he's playing lacrosse the way that it can. The second part of that, though, Trev, is it's a very different weight room workout when you're playing lacrosse compared to football. Lacrosse is a lot like soccer from a strength conditioning standpoint. Now, there's strength and power involved, but what I mean is lacrosse is not a sport where it's short burst, sit for 45 seconds. Short burst, sit for 45 seconds. When I say it's more like soccer, it's the free flowing is what I'm referring to. I'm not trying to compare the sports and people like, I played lacrosse. It's not like soccer. What I'm saying is from a conditioning standpoint, it's very similar to soccer. Long quarters that kind of go on for a while, and you're just constantly running and moving and things along those lines. So where football is more about short, explosive bursts, and there's a different level of lower body explosiveness needed that I don't know that you want to train a lacrosse player to do, because just like you wouldn't train a soccer player to have to build that his explosiveness in that way. Now that he is that, I think you saw more juice coming from, and I know that soccer has halves. I'm talking about lacrosse. Lacrosse is quarters, but it's about the long aspect of it. They go on for a while. They don't stop like football. It's the point. But the point, however, Trevor, is he's training differently now than he would there, and we saw more strength and more explosiveness from Jordan this spring. And that is something that I think is going to lead to him being more effective as a senior. So, yes, there is another level for him to get to. That's what we learned about Jordan Faison this spring. Now, it may not result in a lot of different numbers than what he had last year, Trev. If this guy steps up and that guy steps up and they use more depth, his numbers may be almost identical, but he does it on, like, let's say 120 fewer snaps because he plays 120 fewer, 10 fewer snaps per game. You know what I mean? And he does it in even more clutch moments, and in the completion rate when he gets targeted is even higher than it was last year. It was pretty good last year, Trev. But there's aspects to it where you're like, hey, he was good last year, and his numbers are about the same, but his level of play is significantly better. Certain aspects of it, I don't know how much better can get. I mean, they completed almost 78% of the throws where he was targeted, but those 77.8% of throws were on a lot of hitches, a lot of slants, a lot of stops, and a lot of comebacks. There weren't a lot of the tougher catches for him to make. We saw him make one against Stanford late in the year but we didn't see him get a lot of chances to do that. Well, we saw more of that from him this spring. We saw them throwing him the ball down the field more this spring. So I think all those things that you look at and say, hey, that's something that gets you a little bit fired up about the fact that he can be a more effective player, a more dominant player this year than he was last year, even if the numbers don't necessarily reflect that level of dominance. You know what I mean? Like we've seen guys, Trev, who have really strong performances in a back-to-back year, but their numbers don't necessarily reflect it. Like Elijah Surratt had more production in 2024 in 13 games than he had this past year in 14 games because he missed 2 games. But he caught more passes this year, 65, but he had only 830 yards. He had a lot more touchdowns. But like you look at his numbers and like he wasn't that guy this year. Well, what was the reason why? Was he a better player this year? I think he was a better player this year. But you had Omar Cooper kind of had a breakout. You had Charlie Becker had a bit of a breakout. You know, I mean, there were other things. Even though his play was better, it didn't necessarily result in significantly better numbers on the course of the season. And that's where I think we are with Jordan.
Another player that stood out to us this season, Brian, was Milin Graham, the Ohio State transfer. Now, you have a certain level of expectations when you're coming to a school like Notre Dame that isn't known for producing top-level wide receivers in the same way that Ohio State was. He elected to leave Columbus, a program with 2 guys right now where FanDuel has in the top 8 of their Heisman Trophy odds. So the expectations for Milin Graham coming in were pretty high already. And there's some people that are already, willing to be like, hey, now it's time. He's going to be Notre Dame's next 1,000-yard receiver. And he very well could be. We're not putting stats or numbers on this, Brian, but we do know that he now has the potential to make an immediate impact. At the start of spring, it was like, okay, we'll see how this sorts itself out. Some things we want to see from a consistency standpoint, a work ethic standpoint. We don't know what we're going to see from Jaden Greathouse this spring. After we've kind of reviewed spring, Milin Graham is a guy that could come in and start putting up numbers right away.
Not just that, Trevor, but we were thinking he was more of an outside guy. He had played outside at Ohio State. That's kind of what he was projected to play. And then Jaden Greathouse's injury resulted in him spending most of the spring playing in the slot. So there was an adjustment for him in that regard as well. And so when you look at Milin Graham, there was never a doubt about the talent. And I know a few people that cover Ohio State and some people around the program, and what I was told at that time is they fought to keep him. They didn't want to lose him, but they fought harder to even keep him, even harder than they did Quincy Porter. And they wanted to keep both of them. But there was also some things that really kept Milin from breaking out his first couple of seasons. I mean, when you look at it, there was a period of time last year when Cardinal Tate got hurt and didn't really play he only played 11 games last year. Ohio State played 14, right? Didn't they play 14 games last year? And, he missed 2 games. And so there were certainly opportunities for Milin Graham in those situations to step up and kind of be a guy. And we just didn't really see him do that. He played a lot of snaps against UCLA and, caught 3 passes for 40 yards, played a decent amount of snaps for, against Purdue while he was out, and, had 1 catch for 20 yards. Like even in those games where, hey, there were opportunities for you to go show something, he didn't really make that production. So there still is a question of, we know he's talented, but can he go produce? And I think what we saw this spring is he's got the things that you look for. Here's what he showed us this spring. Obviously very athletic. Not a burner, but a guy that can get down the field, but more so it's the overall athletic package, smooth athlete, quickness, explosiveness, suddenness, can do things after the catch. We certainly saw that. The other thing he showed is he's a pretty smart football player, Trevor. I mean, he showed an ability to get open. He showed a willingness to make the tough catches. And obviously he had that one that got knocked out of his hands, but you go back and watch that play. I don't know a lot of guys that are holding on to that football the way that Adon Schuler timed that up. But then we saw him later in the scrimmage, bend in front of the safeties and right behind the linebackers and make a tough catch to get him inside the 5-yard line. We saw him make that play multiple times in practices, and he made a very similar play to that in the Jersey scrimmage. We've seen him make plays on the slot fade this year, which everybody knows is a bread and butter play for Notre Dame. So, and then the final thing was the two knocks that I heard the most about Milin at Ohio State were, will he work hard enough to be that guy? And can he catch the ball consistently enough? The first one we can't answer directly because we're only at 2 full practices. But in the 4-day times, the 2 fulls and then the 2 partials that we were at, I never saw any things where I'm like, can you see them at practice? Where I'm like, yeah, Milan's kind of just going through the motions during this individual period. And guys will turn it on during one-on-ones or whatever. But like, yeah, he's dropping a bunch of balls during early periods because he's not locked in. I didn't see that from Milin in the 4 practices. Now, that's maybe a third, slightly less than a third of the overall practices. So I'm sure there's a chance that happened. But usually you see those things because the players aren't thinking like, oh, I got to impress the media. Coaches will say think stuff like that, but I don't think the players think that as much. And then, of course, talking to sources around the program, that's not something that I've heard about Milin since he got here. That's a good thing. The second part about the catching thing, that also is something that I haven't noticed as an issue. He catches the ball well, and catching the ball well isn't just about, hey, you caught all the balls thrown at you. You can watch a guy catch the football and say, great hands. Will Fuller, you could watch practice and be like, he doesn't have great hands. Now, the thing about Will Fuller is he was always going to catch it when it mattered, but you're going to see some drops as well when it's, it's not some of those big moments. And you can just see guys that don't really have strong hands, or they double catch a lot, or they're not real confident in their hands. They catch the middle of the ball to the end of the ball a lot more, which means it's getting through their hands a little bit, which means in traffic it's going to be not as effective. And there's just a lot of things you can watch and say, it's not a real crisp, clean pass catcher. And then, of course, he dropped 5 passes. I can only remember 1 pass hitting his hands and not being caught all spring that we were at, and it wasn't a very good throw. It was behind him. So I thought he answered those 2 questions, and then the athleticism was just really, really good. And he gives them more length at that field position than what they've had in recent seasons. So look, we knew the talent was there, but could he really be that guy? I think Milin Graham showed this spring that he's got the tools to be a difference maker at Notre Dame. Not so much, is he going to be the receiver one? That's a whole different debate. But for whatever snaps he's on the field, whether it's as a starter or whether it's as a rotation guy or a starter, and that is also part of rotation guy, outside guy, inside guy, he's going to be a factor for Notre Dame. The only question that I have right now about Milin Graham is I need to see him do it in games. That's true for everybody. But is he just going to stay in the slot, or are they going to cross-train him more, cross Jordan Faison? Like, do they use the trio of him, Jordan Faison, and Jaden Greathouse as sort of a trio that they both can play both? Or does he just stay in the slot? That's a question, but that's not a I don't know if he's going to be good question. That's just more of a where's he going to be question. So those 2 things more than anything else were the biggest questions that we had answered this spring that were directly related to the 26 football team.
Agreed completely. There are a couple of other things here, Brian, I know that we also kind of got confirmed this spring, or that we learned. One of them, we talked about how this is kind of a make or break here for Cam Williams. It's like, hey man, like now it's go time because of the emergent, like they brought in Milin Graham, who is, I believe, the same grade as him. They're both going to be redshirt sophomores this upcoming season. Quincy Porter comes in. He's a year younger. They brought in guys like Devin Fitz and Caden Finley, really talented players in that class. And Elijah Burris is starting to surge. This was go time for Cam Williams, and there is still life there. That's another thing that we saw this spring as well.
With Cam, there's still a lot of question marks about how, is he going to be a factor? Is he going to be in the rotation? Is he going to make plays? Like, how close is he to getting on the field? Like, those things are still a question. But we said before, this is a big spring for him to show that I belong here. And that's really the big takeaway from Cam Williams is there's still hope for him. And I don't know if it's going to be in game 1 or game 3, game 5, but if he can build on what he did this spring, he's going to be hard to keep off the field. He's not there yet. We still saw some of the inconsistency and at times a little bit of choppiness as a route runner. And there was that corner route that he kind of dropped because he ran way too far and didn't react well enough to it and it hit his hands. But like, overall, Cam showed a lot of growth this spring, and he showed a lot of playmaking ability, a lot, to the point where you're like, okay, keep coaching him up, keep working with him, because if you can take that next step by fall, you've got a difference maker. Because the one thing that was obvious this spring is Jordan Faison's talented, Milin Graham's talented, Elijah Burris is talented, Caden Finley's talented, Devin Fitzgerald, Bubba Frazier. Like, there's a lot of talent here. Micah Gilbert. But the one thing that was made clear again is when he knows what he's doing, there's still not a more talented receiver on this roster than Cam Williams. Right? Now, maybe Quincy Porter can be that guy, but he didn't practice this spring. But just physical gifts, when Cam's on, it looks different than it does for everybody else. And that includes Milin Graham, Jordan Faison. It looks different. And we started to see more of that flashing this spring, to the point where you're like, okay, I'm not ready to write him off just yet. He's got a lot to prove still, but we saw that's the Cam Williams. We had several plays this spring, Trev, including the 53-yard catch in the Jersey scrimmage or the blue gold game, where you're like, that's the Cam Williams that I thought Notre Dame was getting. Now we just need to see it a little bit more often.
With Cam going into his redshirt sophomore year, junior year academically, I think he's in a very similar spot to Logan Thomas. And the same task that we kind of challenged Charlie Partridge with yesterday when we broke down the defensive end room, along with Chris Ash, the defensive coordinator, I have the same challenge for Mike Denbrock and Mike Brown. It's like, okay, at this point in his career, we kind of have to stop focusing on what he can't do. Continue to refine, continue to work on it. That doesn't mean, okay, he's still choppy as a route runner, so, let's just not work on that anymore.
Yeah.
Exactly.
He can't run the entire route tree yet, so we just don't play him and use him on any routes. Right.
Right. It's like, okay, well, there's also not a whole lot of DBs in the country that can keep up with him stride for stride. And one of the only ones in the country that can is on Notre Dame's defense wearing number 15. And so you got to find some sort of role for him. So that's going to be interesting to see how that continues to grow throughout the offseason as well. But then finally, Brian, one of the last things that we learned here with the Notre Dame receiving corps is the freshman room is legit. We talked about how impressive of a class that it was, and I think it held up its end of the bargain from what we got to see in the spring. Obviously, it had to progress. We're talking about Bubba Frazier, Devin Fitzgerald, Caden Finley. Braden Robinson was on campus, but he was hurt. He wasn't going through practice. First practice, they were kind of swimming. With guys like Bubba, you could see the twitch and the athleticism, and you could see his explosiveness. And then for others, like for guys like on the first practice, but then for guys like Devin Fitzgerald, that kid was swimming. First couple days out of practice.
Yeah. The Devin Fitzgerald we saw at the end of the spring looked nothing like the Devin Fitzgerald we saw on day one. Because Trev had this real like, hey man, I think Devin Fitzgerald is going to surprise some people. And I remember look on his face and when he first watched Devin in drills, and you're like, yeah, I don't know. I don't know about that. But by the second time we saw him, like a week later, he looked like a different player. And then by the next time you saw him, which was basically a month later at the Jersey scrimmage, you're like, okay, yeah, that's the Devin Fitzgerald I thought Notre Dame was getting. Just as a whole, this freshman class was as good as advertised, Trevor. And the thing about it is the guy that I think is the best player of the group wasn't the one that was the best this spring and has got a lot room to improve, which is a good thing. Another very talented, dynamic guy, arguably the fastest guy at the position. Now, it's debatable between him and Bubba Frazier. Braden Robinson, we didn't see this spring either. And one of the other 5 signees is scoring goals for the number 2 ranked in the nation lacrosse team, and Dylan Faison. You know what I mean? So I'm really excited about the future of that group. Now, are they ready to take over the 2 deep this spring or this season? No. We'll see what it looks like when Quincy Porter gets back and when Jaden Greathouse gets back. But I think this group is going to make their presence felt this season in some regard, potentially in the return game, stepping in for injured players, or maybe just beating guys out. But the good news is this is a little bit almost kind of for the future, but the future at receiver is a lot brighter for me after watching what we saw this spring. And the future's bright when you consider, let me pull up that depth chart again. So the way this depth chart's broken down is on the left, CL, that's the class they're in now. Because Notre Dame has guys listed by their class and then their eligibility. That's how they do it. Look at the right column. That's eligibility. Notice something that's severely lacking from that right column, Trevor. Not a lot of SR period or JR period, which stands for seniors and juniors. There's one scholarship receiver that's a senior. Alex Whitman's a walk-on. There's one scholarship receiver whose eligibility is over after this year, and that's Jordan Faison. There's only 2 guys on that list who will be done no matter what after 2027, and that's Faison and Jaden Greathouse. That doesn't mean everybody's going to be here for 3 more years, because some guys may transfer, some guys may have breakouts and go early in the NFL, but this is a very young receiving core, Trevor, that has 6 players that have sophomore eligibility, and let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 7 players with freshman eligibility. So it's a very young group. So the future at the position is very bright. And it's one thing to say a lot of young guys, but if those young guys don't have talent, then, we're a little bit concerned. And even a guy like Logan Saldate had a good spring. But when you look at that freshman eligibility, that group had some really flashy moments this spring, Trev. And the future at the position is, in my opinion, is very bright. Very bright.
We're rolling here on the Irish Breakdown podcast, brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. And we just got done talking about what we learned over the spring and our takeaways from this wide receiver room. Brian, now it's time to talk about what's next. What are some of the questions that we still have? Because at the end of the day, this room, like the rest of the team, is probably not ready to trot out there and play Wisconsin this Saturday. So there's still some things that they're going to have to continue working on, but it's a promising start. Now, what comes next immediately for this group? You mentioned it briefly. There are some players that they did not have available to practice in the spring that are going to be back in the fall. And that's where you have to start. We talk about a very talented room that we saw in the spring, and they're going to get even more talented when players come back.
Yeah, I mean, because you're going to just obviously we'll have the freshmen that we talked about, right? Braden Robinson will be back at some point in time this fall. And then you talk about Dylan Faison will show up this spring because of lacrosse. And then, of course, they'll get Matt Jeffrey back, who played some meaningful snaps last year. And as Arkansas's, young defensive backs found out in that game last year, he's really fast and athletic. If you remember him torching that poor nickel from Arkansas, that poor backup nickel from Arkansas, and that slot fade from Kenny Minchie. But the big one that you talk about when the new arrivals this summer is obviously Quincy Porter. And this is sort of the projected depth chart going into fall camp. And you can't put him, in my opinion, necessarily ahead of Mike and Cam right away, but I think he'll have a chance to quickly work up the depth chart, because the reality is Quincy Porter just has a skill set that I don't know that any of the other receivers in the roster have. So you talk about getting him a 6'4" plus 207-pound receiver that's got, good vertical speed combined with great length, really good ball skills, and a guy that was considered sort of the heir apparent to Jeremiah Smith. And then he just got, he didn't want to wait 2 more years, and you got Chris Henry coming in and all that. But this is a guy that was a big time recruit that adds a skill set that, as we talked about when we were breaking down Jackson Coleman, Notre Dame wants and needs more of those big body types that you can put in the boundary and say, hey, all else fails, throw a back shoulder to that guy. Throw it up to that guy and give him a chance. And we saw CJ Carr last year with Malachi Fields is willing to do that. Him and Malachi connected on some really impressive plays last season in those situations. And he brings that type of ability. Now, do I expect him to look like the 5th-year senior that Malachi Fields was last year? No. Do I think he can do a lot of the things that Malachi Fields did? Yeah, absolutely. Except I think Quincy has a little bit more juice than Malachi did. So you have to talk about adding him to the depth chart. How does that shake things up from a depth chart standpoint? But then also what we saw this spring, as good as it was this spring, it's only going to get better when he steps into the mix.
Agreed. From a skill set standpoint, he gives another added dimension to this offense that I think that they need. And one thing that we saw from CJ Carr last year is he very quickly grew an on-field relationship with his big 6'4", 220 some odd pound boundary receiver in Malachi Fields. Excited to see what Quincy Porter can do this fall. That's absolutely for sure. But Brian, for all the questions that they answered, for as excited as I am about the players that they're bringing in and getting back over the summer, there are still some questions that remain from this group, and some that ideally will now start to get answered over the course of summer workouts into fall camp. Some will kind of have to wait to see as like the season starts, but there are some questions that still remain. And let's get the big one out of the way. It's around Jaden Greathouse. Will he get healthy? And then will he stay healthy? That's going to be a big factor for Jaden Greathouse this season.
Look, I asked this question the other day. Who's the receiver coming back in college football that has a 100-yard performance in the national semifinals and a 100-plus yard performance in the national championship game? Name that receiver. It's not Jeremiah Smith. It's not Cam Coleman. It's not Malachi Toney. It's not Charlie Becker. It's like you can if you ask somebody that question, a college football fan, I'd be willing to bet you they'd go a while before they'd predict Jaden Greathouse. So we know he can play. We know he's a productive player. We know he can be a big-time player. What we don't know is if he can go through an entire season healthy. And the last time we saw him really playing that way was the national title game after the 2024 season, at the end of the 2024 season. So we can talk all we want about the talent he has, and we'll talk about that in future shows. This isn't necessarily like a preview of the 2026 season. We'll have plenty of time to talk about the specific role he has and his skill set. Everyone that actually knows football and is being honest and objective says when Jaden Greathouse is playing the way he's capable of, he's an absolute dog. Now, we could debate, okay, he doesn't do it enough. He wasn't consistent enough. Those are all fair game. You know, why is a guy that did that against Penn State and did that against Ohio State not doing that against insert bad team during the season? Okay, that's fair. But if a guy's going to be criticized for something, why did you wait to the semifinals and championship game to step up? I'll take that criticism. You know what I mean? Like, I'll take the guy coasting until the last 2 games of the year when he turns it on. I'd like to have him do it all the time. That's a fair critique of Jaden Greathouse. The other fair critique of Jaden Greathouse is, dude's got to stay on the field. And when you've got Milin Graham and Jordan Faison and Cam Williams and Micah Gilbert and Elijah Burris and all the guys we've talked about, you can't afford to miss all 2/3 of one season and then all of spring the next year with 2 different injuries, because it's hard to say we're going to build the offense around a guy that you don't feel comfortable is going to be there every week. And that's the reality of Jaden Greathouse. So when you talk about this group reaching its full potential, could they be an outstanding receiving core if Jaden Greathouse is hurt all year and doesn't play much? Yeah, they can. Can they reach their full potential without it? No, I don't think they can. I don't. Look, Jaden Greathouse had more catches and more yards in the title game against Ohio State than, he had more catches for more yards in the semifinals against Penn State than what Milin Graham has in 2 whole years at Ohio State, and he has the same number of catches and more yards in the championship game against Ohio State than Milin Graham has had in his 2 years at Ohio State, or that Quincy Porter's had in his year at Ohio State. So the talent is there, the production is there, but can he be there? Can he show up every day and give you what he's capable of? I can spin it all I want to, he'll be fine. It's a hit. Guys, you have to be willing to say this is a major concern, and he has to prove to the coaching staff that I can be out there every day. You can count on me every day. I'm able to build that relationship with CJ Carr, and I'm ready to go. Because, he looked healthy at the end of the year, at the end of the spring, watching him run around in pre-practice of the Jersey scrimmage, and then watching him in pre-practice of the blue gold game, and then watching him after Devin Fitzgerald's touchdown, jumping up in the air and doing like the chest bump thing. He looked fine. So my thought is they know what he can do. Let's not take a chance of him getting injured again. That would be my guess. But he's got to show that he can be that guy that is there every day. And if he does, then I feel a whole lot better about this receiving core playing to its full potential. Because now there's less pressure on Milin Graham, and you can move Milin Graham around a little bit more, which I think will be good for him. So it's certainly a big question for Notre Dame this spring.
Yeah, without a doubt, man. They're a better team. They're a better receiving core with Jaden Greathouse on the field. And to your point, their ceiling is significantly higher. And I don't think that's undeniable. right now they have the highest odds to make the college football playoffs on FanDuel. And I don't think that that's a coincidence. And I also don't think that's not because of Jaden Greathouse. I don't think he's the only reason, but it's not because of that. You know what I'm saying? But they need him back out there. Only time will tell how that's going to play out. I'm with you. But that isn't the only question that still remains. Another one is Micah Gilbert. He's a player that now, for what feels like the third spring in a row, we're talking about Micah Gilbert and the kind of spring that he had. You know, first couple of years, it was, man, like they might have a dude, and Micah Gilbert balled out in the 2024 spring game, the 2025 spring game. He had some impressive catches, and then now, or 2025 earlier in the spring, he had an impressive performance. Injured his hand. We didn't see him in the blue gold game. And then obviously this past spring, kind of some questions. And now it's, can he be the guy in the boundary? One of the things he brought up about Quincy Porter's return is I don't think it would be fair to guys like Cam Williams and Micah Gilbert to just immediately put Quincy Porter at the top of the depth chart at boundary. Now, with that being said, if the spring continues to put, or if how their performances were in the spring carry over into summer camp and into fall camp, I don't know if it'll take Quincy Porter that long to move his way up the depth chart. Is Micah Gilbert ready to step up into that big time role? Now's the time, man. It's, you know, redshirt sophomore going into your junior year academically. It's your third year with the program. Be very curious to see how that pans itself out.
Yeah, Micah Gilbert's he's entering that frustrating period for me because you see the tools, Trevor. When he's on, you see the tools. So I remember how good he was his first spring here at Notre Dame, and I remember the first couple practices that we saw him this year. I mean, the first practice of the spring, he's torching Mark Zachary. He's, you know, and I think the next day that they had a practice, would be 2 days later, but like the next practice they had, Notre Dame puts out a video of him catching a long touchdown pass where he's torching Mark Zachary again. And Mark Zachary's a good football player that started games at Notre Dame and has played pretty good football in his last 2 starts at Notre Dame. So, and when he was getting beat, like he got beat for a touchdown against Purdue, he was hip to hip with the guys and play the ball very well. You don't see guys running past Mark Zachary except for Micah Gilbert. And we were, you know, the intel that we got about his battles with Cam Williams. But then we go to the Jersey scrimmage, and outside of a backside dig against zone coverage, he's not a factor. He's just getting completely aced out by Cam Williams. There was one time they tried to throw him the ball down the field, and Cam rode him right out of bounds. And then the blue gold game, he doesn't do a whole lot. He has that long play. He doesn't make a play for the ball, which is still frustrating. The guy with his body type and his size and his strength doesn't compete for the ball more when it's in the air, which is frustrating. And then the next 3 routes he runs are just kind of like borderline half speed. And people, oh, what's CJ Carr doing? CJ's literally, you could see the film. He's waiting on Micah Gilbert to get out of the break because he's going like barely half speed on the route. And you're just like, yeah, that maybe he's great in all the other practices, but there's just enough for me to say, I think the kid's got the tools to be a really good football player, but he's got to start putting it together. You're a junior now. You know, you played a decent amount of snaps last year. You caught a touchdown pass against Miami in a meaningful situation. You've got to step up because if you don't, Cam's going to keep charging. Quincy Porter's going to keep charging. Devin Fitzgerald's going to keep charging. So I think this is a big summer and fall camp for Micah Gilbert. Can you be that guy or not? I need to see it more consistently. And he, you know, I just need to see Micah Gilbert be that good version of himself far more consistently. Part of that too, Trevor, is he is going against Leonard Moore every day. And there's not a lot of receivers that are going to just have a great spring when they're going against Leonard Moore every day. So I've got to keep reminding myself of that. But he wasn't going against Leonard Moore in the blue gold game. And it was kind of the same thing. And that's a little bit of my frustration.
Let's talk about 2 other guys here, Brian. Let's talk about Elijah Burris and Logan Saldate. And those are 2 guys that have to take another jump if they're going to force their way onto the field this year. 2 guys with a lot of talent. You've said it before. I can also attest because I was in practice. I saw him last year. I saw him again this year. This is the best spring that Logan Saldate's had at Notre Dame. Oh. I guess I can't really attest to what his 2024 spring was, you know, but this is probably the best that he's looked.
Oh, no question. I got to give a lot of credit to Logan Saldate because after what they did in the portal and the push that Elijah Burris got last year, and then going out and signing a 5-man receiver class with 4 of the guys that kind of look just like you. You know what I mean? Like, Logan Saldate could have easily been like, I'm out. I'm going to transfer out somewhere out west. I'm going to go to Arizona State, or I'm going to go to UCLA or whatever, and just not even compete. Now, he may still eventually transfer. That's a possibility for everybody at this point in time, except for Jordan Faison. That's the only guy who's can't transfer anywhere because he's done after this season. But, like, I love the fact that he stayed and competed instead of bouncing. And he had a good spring. I remember the play that I described after the Jersey scrimmage. I explained to you guys a backside touchdown that Noah Grubbs threw. And I think I said to Devin Fitzgerald, and he caught it between 2 guys. It was a really tough catch. I thought watching it, because it was on the other side of the field, I saw the one and saw the backside throw. I thought it was Devin Fitzgerald. And then when I went and saw the clip that Notre Dame put out, I was like, holy smokes, that was Logan Saldate. Now, I could remember the route and I could remember all that, but I just thought it was Devin Fitzgerald. It was really, really good catch in between 2 guys. Making plays after the catch. There was a play, I think in the Jersey scrimmage, where they had him dead to rights in the backfield on a quick pass, and he breaks the tackle and goes and picks up 3-4 extra yards. But the difference between 2nd and 11 and 2nd and 7 is pretty significant in a play where the defense read it pretty well. Was definitely the best spring we've seen from Logan Saldate, to the point where, okay, if you can do this again, you put yourself in position to where you earn the coach's trust and say, hey, either A, he's in the rotation, or B, if he isn't, if there is an injury or somebody's not performing well, we have no problem putting him into the rotation. And I certainly think he did that this spring. And I think Elijah Burris did the same thing. Now, here's the key. Elijah had some very good moments this spring. He still has to get stronger and compete for the ball a little bit more, but he's improved his route running. He's able to make some plays down the field. The thing for both of them, though, is if they want to force their way into the rotation, they've got to build on what they did in the spring, not repeat it. Like, they took strides to kind of get there, but there's still space between them and Faison and Graham and Greathouse and guys like that. So they've got to keep charging, keep building, which means this summer and fall camp are going to be really big for those 2 guys. And then the other thing is, if they don't win jobs early on, they've got to stay locked in and stay focused, so that way they're keyed in if their number is called. We've talked about this with like Junior Tuihalamaka. Young man doesn't play a single snap the first, 2 games of the year. Wasn't going to play a snap in the 3rd game of the year until the blowout time, if not for an injury to Jordan Botelho. Jordan Botelho doesn't get hurt. I don't know that Junior Tuihalamaka plays a meaningful snap of football all year for Notre Dame. Injuries thrust him into the lineup, but what you saw the minute he stepped on the field against Purdue is mentally he was ready when his number was called. He wasn't, I'm sure he wasn't happy. He wasn't sitting on the sidelines thinking about the hot dog he was going to eat at halftime. He wasn't thinking about the pretty girl in the 3rd row. He was locked into it. If he wasn't sitting there sulking about how this is BS, I should be playing, I could have done this, I could have done that. Doesn't mean he was happy about it. But he was locked in and ready. And when his number was called, he immediately started looking good and making plays. And then obviously goes out the next week in his first start of the season and makes a big play. Breaks up a pass near the goal line that Christian Gray picks off. And just against Miami of Ohio, just overall played a really strong game. You got to be locked in when your number's called. It doesn't mean you got to be happy about it. I don't want a guy. I'm totally happy not playing, coach. Sit me over there. I got to take care of this. You know what I mean? No, you want a guy that wants to play, but you want a guy that also is going to say, okay, I'm not playing. So what's my response to it? I'm going to work my tail off and try to earn that spot. But if my number's called, I'm going to be ready. And that's the challenge for Elijah and Logan, because if their moment comes for whatever reason, there's an injury, keeps the guy out for a couple weeks, and so you got to get your chance. If you're not locked in when that moment comes, then you're going to miss your chance to make that play. Think about Jordan Faison. Didn't play a single down first, 5 games of the year in 2022. And because they couldn't play him, because the minute they play him, he goes off lacrosse scholarship and he gets on a football scholarship. Didn't play a meaningful down. First game he ever plays in is against Louisville, and he balls out. And then the rest of the year, balls out. Has 100 yards in the bowl game as a true freshman. If Jordan Faison was like, man, this is dumb. I can't believe I'm wasting my time with football. I'm just start thinking about lacrosse. Guess what happens when he gets thrust into the game against Louisville? He doesn't play well. And we don't hey, you remember that Faison guy that's killing the lacrosse? Remember when he tried to play football back in 2022? You guys remember that? Yeah, that was good times. That would be 2023. Yeah, that was good times. That was good time. No, it was 2023. Those were good times back when he was trying to be a football player. Man, what a heck of a lacrosse player he is. You know what I mean, Trev? We're having a very different conversation because he would have missed his window to make an impact. And now look at him. So those guys have to be ready. They have to be ready this spring or this fall. But part of being ready is you gotta close that gap between now and the time the season kicks off. Because otherwise they'll just do what they did last year, and that's just we had a 5-man rotation, now we're just gonna have a 4-man rotation. We really only have a 3-man rotation, so we're just gonna do more 12 personnel. And that's how we save guys reps. You don't want to be in that situation.
Brian, let's kind of back everything up and talk big picture here as we kind of start to wrap up this segment. And we're talking about some of the questions that we still have. Now, we've talked about how, as a unit, the wide receivers showed a lot of growth this season. But are they actually ready to take that big jump we think that they're capable of? I go back to our conversation at the start of the show. Here we are again, talking about the talented Notre Dame receiving corps and what they can do this year. What makes this year different? Do you think that they are at a spot now where that they are capable of taking that jump that we're going to see in the fall?
In short, yes. I think what we saw this spring, Trevor, is enough guys. Well, I'd say the room is a growth. Like, is there anybody at receiver that you watched this spring and said that guy regressed?
No.
Yeah, same here. I was an honest question. It wasn't a setup question. It was an honest question. I don't either. Now, you could argue that Micah Gilbert didn't take the jump that I hoped he would take, but he didn't regress because he was out there all spring. That right there was a win for Micah Gilbert, that he made it through the whole spring. That's a win because he has had some moments where he's been banged up the last couple of years. Nobody regressed. So that's a positive, and that's also a sign of good coaching. But is it where they need to be fully? No, but there was so much growth, so much potential, so much playmaking that you say, okay, this room is going to be pretty good. The question now isn't will they be good or not? The question now is how good? Will they be a top 10 receiving room, which I think they are now from a talent standpoint? And if we agree that they're in the top 10, are they going to be 10th? Are they going to be 9th? Are they going to be 6th? Or do they jump into top 3 or 4? Do they have enough talent to become a top 3 to 4 receiver room? Yes. Is that talent proven? No, which is why they're not going to be ranked in our top 4 or 5 when we do the receiving room. But the talent in what they showed this spring is enough for me to say that's a top 10 receiver room based on talent and the proven production that is there. Let's not forget the fact that there's 2 very proven receivers on this roster that have not only put up numbers, but that have put up numbers in playoff games. Jordan Faison had 7 catches for almost 100 yards against Indiana
89.
In 2024. Had a very good game against Georgia with running, blocking, and catching. And then, of course, we know what Jaden Greathouse did in the last 2 games of that season. So their leading receiver from 2024 is back. It's Jaden Greathouse. Their leading receiver from 2025 is back. That's Jordan Faison. So there is some proven production coming back. I think a lot of people think, well, you got to prove to me. Well, I mean, name me other teams that have guys that have done in the postseason what these 2 guys have done that are coming back, right? Like, so, but then you look at the depth of talent, all that. It's going to be a very good room. But like Daily Comments, our resident Miami fan earlier was talking about, rooms right now that he'd rank ahead of Notre Dame's, Oregon's, Texas, Ohio State, Clemson. I'm like, yeah, I agree with a lot of those because there was one that I had disagreed with, and that was LSU. I don't think LSU has a better room right now, nor a more proven room right now than Notre Dame. Like a lot of the others, I'm like, do I think Notre Dame could be better than insert team? Yes, I think they could. But when Miami's got 2,000-yard receivers coming back that are dynamic players, it's like if I'm going to sit there and say, well, Notre Dame is better because of the depth, well, what depth? Because Miami has more proven depth than Notre Dame does. Proven. So now I got to get into what? Well, I think Milin Graham's more talented than Cam Vaughn. Okay. Cam, he gets 6 career catches. Cam Vaughn's coming off of like 500-yard season last year in the Big 12. So that is where the lack of proven production makes it harder to rank them above a groups that I think they might be more talented or deeper than, maybe, but those groups are certainly more proven. And I think so when we get into that conversation, it's like now you got to go show it. But I'm more confident now than really I've been in years that they're going to show it to some degree. I think now the question isn't, will they have a top 10 to 12 receiver room? I think that's kind of a given at this point in time, Trevor, in my opinion. The question is, but are you closer to 12 or are you closer to 1? And that's going to have a big impact on how good this team is this year. Or let me phrase that. That's going to have a big impact on how good this offense is going to be this year. And it's not about production and numbers, because I think this room is going to feast on about 8 opponents minimum that Notre Dame is going to face this year. How do they play against Miami? How do they play on the road against BYU? How do they play against SMU? And then also, how do they play in the postseason? That's going to determine this group. And say whatever you want about Bo Collins and sophomore version of Faison and Greathouse and Chris Mitchell or whatever, but those kids stepped up in the playoffs in 2024. Bo Collins was targeted twice in the game against Georgia, caught one of them, drew a pass interference on the other one, and they only got 2 targeted twice. One of them went for a touchdown. But can this group be that? Can they make the impact like that, and even further? That I think that remains a question at this point in time, Trev. But I'm quite confident that this is going to be a top 10 to 12 receiver room. Like, very confident. We haven't seen this kind of depth of talent at Notre Dame in a while. Have we seen talented guys? Yeah, every year. Kevin Austin was a flipping stud athletically and talent-wise in 2021. Went to the combine at 6'2 plus, 200 plus pounds, and jumped almost 40 inches and ran a low 4.4 and had great agility numbers and all that. We've seen these kind of guys come through Notre Dame. They haven't always had the depth of that kind of talent. And I think that's what makes this one different. But, of course, there's still areas where they got to improve and things they have to show. You've got to play with more urgency as a unit. Will Mike Brown develop a proper depth chart where it's not just 4 guys, you're running 4 guys ragged by the end of the season, getting 50, 60 snaps a game from your top receivers? Will they compete for the football more? That's a big one, because you don't have Malachi Fields, and Jaden Greathouse can do that, but can he stay healthy? This as a unit, I don't want to see receivers waiting on the football as DBs break through them like we saw in the blue gold game, like we saw at times in the Jersey scrimmage. I want to see them compete for the ball more, like we see on some of the highlights that they've shown where they're competing for the ball. Play with a little bit more urgency, but overall, this is a group that I think is poised and ready to take that jump and at least be a top 10 to 12 group. Then by the end of the year, do they keep chopping away at the teams in front of them to where it's like, hey, this group can have as big of impact as anybody? I'll see your Jeremiah Love, and I'll raise you that we got 6 guys that can make plays. That kind of thing. I'm not saying, I'm just using that as an example. So that's what they still have to prove. And the biggest one is just, I know in a big moment in the game's on the line, if you throw the ball to Jeremiah Smith, I have a pretty good idea he's going to go make that play. I feel that way about Malachi Toney. Does Notre Dame have that guy if Jaden Greathouse isn't healthy? That's a legitimate concern for me. And that's why I say that competing for the football thing is something that Mike Brown has done. Here's my advice to Mike Brown is, I think he's still, he's been coaching a little bit, but sometimes maybe don't put as much emphasis on something that wasn't a part of your game if you're coaching the position you played. And Mike Brown is not a very big guy. He wasn't a contested catch guy. He wasn't a catch the ball in traffic all the time guy. And so maybe that part of his teaching is lacking a little bit. Maybe that's why we don't see a whole lot of that, because they'll fight for the ball on a back shoulder, but not on an underthrown ball, not on a dig route. Those are the things that I need to see him do. Maybe look at that and say, hey, we're going to make this little adjustment right here, and that's going to take our level of play up a notch on top of all the other good things he's already doing. They can do that, then I think it makes this room even better. But that's my sense of it, Trev. I'd like to get your opinion, because you saw this group at the beginning of spring, and then you saw them twice at the end of spring. And what was your takeaway from that?
Yeah, I mean, look, here's where Notre Dame's wide receiver room is at. They have about 9 to 10 guys that can play right now, in my opinion. Right now. But it's also unrealistic for us as fans or us as analysts to sit here and say, okay, go out and play all 9 to 10. There has to be some level of continuity in this offense. Here's my challenge, because I echo all the things that you said about what they have to work on. Sense of urgency, consistency coming off the line, fighting for the football, making plays in the big moments. That's one of the reasons why we think back so highly to what Jaden Greathouse did against Penn State and Ohio State. That was the first time in a very long time we've watched a Notre Dame wide receiver have that level of an impact in that magnitude of a game. Now, I think back to all the big games that Notre Dame had played before, and sometimes you have to look a little bit in between the weeds. Why do we still talk about that post route that Avery Davis ran against Clemson in 2020? Because it was electric. It was an impact moment in a big game. But
it wasn't even his biggest catch on that drive.
Right.
Right. You know what I mean?
Right. But with all due respect to some of the other receivers that get brought up sometimes in our chat, what was the big catch that Kevin Austin had against Cincinnati?
We're going to be sitting here for a long time waiting on people to remember what that catch was, because it wasn't there.
Like, what was the big catch Tobias had against Ohio State in 2023?
Torch Central Michigan, torch NC State, but not Ohio State. Didn't come down with that go route that could have been a game-changing play against Duke up the left sideline. You remember that? Chris Tyree dropping that deep shot that should have been a touchdown against Louisville. That changes that game, 100%.
Yep.
So that's a great point, Trev. They made big plays all year. They were one of the best teams. Sam Hartman had over a 9, I think, yard per catch until the very end of the season. Maybe ended up 8.9, something like that. But that's because they padded their stats against Central Michigan and Navy and Tennessee State. But when they played, to your point, it's a great point, against Ohio State. They actually had a couple guys make nice plays, but those were after the catch plays, not the guy that made the big plays that fought for the ball in that game was the tight end Mitchell Evans. Louisville, they didn't do what they needed to do. Duke, they didn't do what they needed to do. And so great. You put up big numbers. Where were you in the Clemson game?
Mm-hmm.
Where were you in the Ohio State game? Where were you in the Louisville game? Where were you in the Duke game?
Yep.
It's a great point.
Yep. The biggest thing that my challenge to Mike Denbrock and Mike Brown is, can you find roles for players like Cam Williams? Because, and this is just me, I'm not a coach on the team. Obviously, I've never coached football. But when you have a player with that level of talent, there's a role that you have to find for him. Mm-hmm. If we're talking about how good Jaden Greathouse is and what he did in the playoffs, and Jordan Faison's leading receiver, and Quincy Porter is meant to replace Jeremiah Smith, and Milin Graham, high school with Tate Johnson and trains, and he had a breakout spring. And if after all that, we're still able to sit here and be like, but yeah, Cam Williams is still the most physically gifted player in the room, you got to find a role for him. Will Mike Denbrock and Mike Brown be lenient enough to put him on the field, despite not knowing every single check and every single audible and every single route on the route tree? I'm not saying give them shortcuts, but when you're in crunch time moments of games, there are very few cornerbacks in the country starting right now that can keep up with Cam Williams stride for stride. Very few. Continue to work on it with him. Don't just throw it all out the window and say whatever. But that's going to be the biggest thing for him, man. The biggest.
Yep. Tools are there. Got to put it all together. That little sign was for someone in the comments.
Brian, up next here on the Irish Breakdown podcast.
Before we move on to part 3, I do have to say something real quick, because I have crushed Miami fans the last couple of years, because my engagement with Miami fans on social media has always been terrible. Terrible. We have 3 Miami fans that are relatively regular posters over the last month and have been really good, contributors. Daily comments. Spencer, who I don't agree with on almost anything, but he talks ball and it's respectful. And then Albert McKinney. Really appreciate that, guys. We do really appreciate that. So I bust your guys' chops and stuff like that. That's kind of part of the fun. When I'm doing that to you, it's because we've embraced. I do that to Archer. I do that to Insured by Big. So I want to say that I have not engaged with a thoughtful Miami fan in my life until the 3 of you joined our chat. So we appreciate that very much. Very much. because we always say we welcome fans of other teams here, but then it's they come and they act like clowns and they're banned in 5 minutes. You know what I mean? So we really appreciate it. Really
End of the day,
it.
man, we're just two guys that like to sit down and talk ball. We just have microphones to do it. Brian, we're rolling here on the Irish Breakdown podcast, brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. And up next, we're talking about the future of the Notre Dame receiver room. We talked about what we learned about him in the spring, the questions we still have. We also brought up the graphic about their roster and how young it is. But now the goal is to continue adding fuel to that fire and to continue rolling, because that's what the top-level programs do at wide receiver. That's what Clemson did for so long. That's what Ohio State continues to do. That's what, for a long stint of time, that's what LSU would do. You know, that's what Alabama would do, is continuing to add to it. So the future for the wide receiver room is also just as important of what it's going to do this year.
Look, Trev, I mean, I'm excited about the future of the wide receiver room based on what's there now. But also my excitement comes from they're starting to show an ability to land top players, and it's in different ways now. So it's the days of inconsistent wide receiver recruiting are not necessarily gone. I think that's still a question. I liked the 24 receiver class. Cam Williams, I still think, has loads of potential, like Micah Gilbert. Like, even if they don't pan out, they were big recruiting wins. Sometimes these guys don't pan out for whatever reason. Logan Saldate is a good player. 25 group had some potential, but it was a little underwhelming when you look about. I love Elijah Burris, but I want him to be my number 2, not my number 1. And then the other 2 guys were real raw. One's already gone. 26 class kind of got things turned around, but it's not just recruiting the high school players that has helped Notre Dame thrive at this position to varying degrees. Like, you could say, no, the receiving corps at Notre Dame in 2024 was not an elite group. It was not a top 10 receiving corps, but it was a group of guys that when they needed to step up and make plays or step up in big moments, they did it. They were clutch. Well, Bo Collins is not going to be mentioned in the same breath as Jeremiah Smith and Cam Coleman and guys like that from a talent standpoint or a number standpoint. But you know what Bo did throughout his career, his 1-year career at Notre Dame? When the game was on the line and they needed somebody to make a play and Bo was targeted, he made a play. And same thing with Faison and Greathouse and Jaden Harrison is a kick returner, the big kick return against Miami. So, like, those things are all there. But it just hasn't been that we can take over games on the regular type of group. And that's where you start to see, I think the last year has shown us they're capable of getting there. A year and a half. You look at last year's portal class. Will Pauling in a lot of years is your number 1 incoming portal guy, and he was number 2 by a mile. Not because he's not a good player. This is a guy that had played in the Big Ten for 3 years, a guy that had a 100-plus yard game against LSU in a bowl game. This is a guy that was a good football player. It's more about, but he ain't Malachi Fields. You know what I'm saying? Like, you went out and got a 3rd-round draft pick who was being projected as a potential 1st-round draft pick prior to the combine. So his film was telling people late 1st round, early 2nd. And then the shorts workout told people 3rd. And in early 3rd, you got that out of the portal. Then the next year, you went out and got 2 top 100 high school recruit type talents from Ohio State that have at least the tools. They got to prove themselves. They're not as experienced as Malachi or Will Pauling or Bo Collins or Chris Mitchell or Jaden Harrison or Caleb Smith. You remember that's still that whole situation still trips me out. You haven't gotten those guys. They're not experienced from that, but they might be the most physically talented that they've landed at the position even with Malachi. And so they've shown the ability to, hey, if we need it, we can go to the portal and get difference makers and get impact players. That supplemented with what we're seeing on the recruiting trail has me as optimistic as I've been since like the 15-16 recruiting. Because if y'all remember what they did in 15 and 16, here's the players Notre Dame signed in the 15 and 16 recruiting classes. Equanimous St. Brown, Miles Boykin, Chase Claypool, Kevin Stepherson, Javon McKinley, CJ Sanders. I feel like I'm missing one. And then, like, right before that, obviously, they got Torrey Hunter Jr., Corey Robinson, and Will Fuller in the 13 class. So think about it, from 13 to 16, They signed all the guys I just mentioned, plus Will Fuller, plus Torrey Hunter Jr., plus Corey Robinson. Like, that's pretty good. It obviously has not been the same consistently since then. And in 1 year, they signed Michael Young who I liked as the only true receiver in that class. And you're like, boy, this is not good. They're starting to get back to more consistent recruiting, but the 27 class and 28 classes are really when you need to turn the corner and say, hey, we're getting really good players, but are we getting game changers? Maybe. I think Caden Finley has the potential to be that. I think Bubba Fraser has the potential to be that. Devin Fitzgerald might have the potential to kind of be that high volume type of impact player, but there's another level that they need to get to from a recruiting standpoint. I think it starts in 27. It'll take into 2028. That's going to make me feel even better than where I do now, because when you look at portal recruiting, Trevor, when you talk about recruiting, you can't just talk about high school recruiting anymore. You have to talk about the fact that in 2024, they got Bo Collins and Jaden Harrison and Chris Mitchell. That ended up having a huge impact on their ability to go play for a championship. If you think about like the plays that Bo made, the plays that Jaden Harrison made, it just does. I mean, you look at the 25 class of Malachi Fields and Will Pauling. That group had an impact. Will Pauling was a flipping captain. He was on campus 5 minutes and got named a captain. Why? That says a lot about who he is and the respect he earned in the locker room in that short period of time. Certainly had an impact on last year's team. You can't be like, well, I know that they set a record for yards per play and scoring, but it wasn't because of the transfer receivers. Yeah, it definitely was in part because of them. And then, of course, this year with Milin Graham and Quincy Porter. So being able to supplement high school recruiting with that type of impact in the portal, Trevor, is very important when you start talking about the ability to consistently stock the receiving core in future seasons.
Oh, without a doubt. Attracting top-level talent, especially for a position like wide receiver, isn't just specific to high school anymore. And you're seeing top-level programs. This isn't a scenario where it's like, yeah, but Notre Dame has to do it. Not necessarily. Why are we high on Texas's receiving core? It's not just because Ryan Wingo comes back. It's because they got Cam Coleman. Why are we high on IU's receiving core again?
And the year before that got Emmett Mosley.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. Like why are we high on? Why do we think Oklahoma is a sleeper room this year? It's not just because Isaiah Satenga comes back. Mm-hmm. It's also because they got the kid from Texas. So we're seeing teams.
Parker Livingston. They got Trell Harris from UVA.
Yep.
Right.
Yep. Same thing with Miami's receiving core. It's not just because Malachi Toney comes back, because Cooper Barcotti's coming in and Vendrivius Jacobs is coming in. So there's a lot of teams.
Ohio State dipped into the receiver portal this year. They lost 2 guys to Notre Dame, so they went out and got the kid from, I think it was FIU or UTSA? I forget what's UTSA. Did you go to UTSA?
Yeah.
So they were able to dip in the portal and get a veteran player to help kind of ease some of that burden. So even the guys that aren't getting like the dogs like Cam Coleman, they're going to the portal to supplement the roster, and it's been a very, very important thing.
100%. You look at the impact that they've had for Notre Dame over the last couple of years. 12 of their 23 points in the Sugar Bowl came from transfer portal wide receivers, not just portal players. And I mean, you could even take it a step further and say that their transfer portal quarterback threw a touchdown to their transfer portal wide receiver. And then on the next time they touched the football, a transfer portal wide receiver housed it from 98 out on a kick return. So the impact is great. You have to be able to attract high-level talent in the portal and in high school recruiting. And Notre Dame is starting to do that. Now it's about continuity. Now it's about continuing to do. We talk about consistency on the field with players like Micah Gilbert and Cam Williams. They also have to do that on the recruiting trail as well. I'm with you.
Mm-hmm. Trev, when I look at let's talk 27 recruiting. Well, let's pull up the old trusty depth chart again here real quick, Trevor, and because I think we need to once again lay a foundation for why Notre Dame is going to have a smaller class. We've talked about this. There's a world in which I think Notre Dame only takes 2 receivers in the 2027 class, depending on who the next receiver to commit is. And why are they like, seriously, hold on a second. You guys have not recruited at an elite level consistently for years, and you're going to take 2 guys? Yeah. Look at that. That's why. Well, what if guys transfer? Then you go to the portal and replace them like they've done each of the last 3 years. That's the whole point. And so when you look at a depth chart that has 15 scholarship players, And 13 of those 15 scholarships. This is I can't even, these words coming out of my mouth. It's just still weird to say. Every time I say it, I'm like, hold on a second, that can't be right. And I got to look back at the depth chart. I'm like, oh, that's right. Yeah. 13 of the 15 scholarship players are sophomore or freshman eligibility, which means they could be on the team in 2028. Now, they're not all going to be on the team in 2028. But conceivably, you could not recruit a single receiver in the 27 or 28 classes and have 13 talented scholarship receivers on the roster in 2028. Again, not going to happen, but I'm making the point. So what Notre Dame focused on in the 27 class, they were kind of back and forth based on conversations of, do we take 3 to go beyond that? And I think a couple things have factored in. Number one is, okay, if we get the right type of guys, if we get the right guys, then we'll go lower on numbers. And then that way we can, it's a year where they're in a good place with some defensive linemen, and they're in a year where, they'd like to go beyond 4 secondary players. They'd like to get a second running back. And then also let's save some spots for the 2028 class or for the portal next year, things like that. And you're in a position where you can now say, because of that right there that we're looking at, and if you're listening via podcast, it's a depth chart that shows all these freshman and sophomore eligibility players on the roster. You're in a situation where you can focus on impact talent over numbers. And a big reason why you can do that is because what you also see in that list are 5 guys listed as freshmen, both class and eligibility. Because you just landed a 5-man freshman class, and that 5-man freshman class is already showing they're going to be pretty good. And then you see some of those redshirt freshmen like Elijah Burris start to say, hey, I'm going to be a player here too. Before he got injured, Jerome Bettis Jr. was flashing as well in the spring a little bit. So when you have that kind of youth, Trev, you say, okay, I think we're going to be okay. So let's focus on impact over talent, and then space out maybe the bigger classes and look for more numbers in 28 and maybe 29 when some of these guys start to, move on either in the portal or hopefully, in the NFL. So that's the reason why numbers, and I think when I say that they're only going to take 2 guys this year, I think that kind of surprised some people. Like, well, why? That's why I think it was good to lay out. That's why. Now, part of that is because it is dependent upon, do you get a dude? And do you get the guys that fit your needs? So obviously Jackson Coleman did that. We did a breakdown on Friday when he committed, or Monday when he committed, of his game. You can go back and watch that breakdown or listen to that breakdown. It's its own segment now on our YouTube channel. We cut it out and it's its own segment. You can do the same thing on the podcast app, depending on how you want to listen to it. And we talked about like why they went after him and what he brings to the table and the backstory and all that. But the point is, they wanted a tall, down the field weapon. And the minute they got on that kid, they fell in love and they knew that by taking him, your chances of getting a couple other players that you really liked and put a lot of time into, you weren't going to be able to take, or you might not be able to take that. But they said, I don't care. There was never a second hesitation in my conversations of, now, are you okay not getting this kid? Oh yeah. Like, and they're in a good place with those kids I'm talking about. It's not like they're fading and now they've got to scramble and go get Jackson Coleman. They identified him, met him, and were like, we're going to get this kid. So he gives you that unique skill set that they wanted, high ceiling guy that they wanted. But at the end of the day, Trev, this 27 class is going to success at receiver recruiting. This 27 class is really going to come down to one player.
It's going to be Julius Jones Jr., man, a player that we've talked about quite a bit on this channel. And I know it's a disclaimer that we say every time, but we have new listeners every single day. It's not because his dad is Julius Jones. They play completely different positions.
It's for us as fans. I love that it's Julius Jones.
Oh, sure.
As a Virginia native, I love that. But as an analyst, and when you talk to the Notre Dame coaches, I don't know that every Notre Dame coach initially knew that. I don't know that every initial, like when they first started recruiting Julius, I'm pretty confident that not everybody on staff, and when I mean staff, I also mean recruiting people, had any idea that Julius Jones was a stud running back at Notre Dame. You got to think about it, Trev. There's some guys in the recruiting staff that weren't born when Julius Jones Jr. was balling out at Notre Dame, or were babies when he was balling out at Notre Dame. I don't know that they all knew that. Now they all know that now, and they learned it very quickly. But the point is, They went after him because they looked at the film and said, that is an absolute dude that's been balling out at St. Thomas Aquinas since his freshman year. That's why he's a top target, because he brings a skill set to the table that they just don't have a lot of. I wrote, I'm going to have an article coming out here, and I tried to publish it beforehand, but I ended up losing all the information. But here's what makes him different. He's got Jordan Faison, Jaden Greathouse, and Cam Williams kind of all wrapped into one player. He's got the dynamic vertical speed that Cam has. He's got Jaden Greathouse's contested catch ability, and he's got Jordan Faison's shiftiness. Am I wrong? He combines the best of those three guys. That's why I rank him as a top 50 player. That's why I rank him as, in my opinion, arguably the number one must-get player at any position in this class. Certainly the biggest number one must-get guy on the offensive side of the ball. You land him, love this two-man receiving core. You miss him and you got to go to your next guy, it could still be good, but it won't be the same.
No, when we sat down and we watched this film, Brian, I said who he reminded me of watching him was Jamar Chase. That's not me saying he's going to go out and win the Biletnikoff. I'm not saying he's going to go have 21 receiving touchdowns in his redshirt freshman year of college. I'm just saying from a play style, it's kind of like what you said, watching CJ Carr's play style reminds you of Joe Burrow. Not because he's going to go out and throw for 60 touchdowns and win the Heisman and all this other stuff, which, I mean, he very well could do this year. But that's what I thought of when I was watching Julius Jones Jr. because of his skill set, because of all the things he mentioned. Similar body types. They're both like 5'11", 6-foot guys. You know, they're both very shifty in the open field, but have the speed to take the top off the defense. But then when they get the ball in their hands, they make plays like a running back can make. Yeah, he is an absolute must-get player in this class, man. I'm with you completely. Absolutely with you.
I think when you look at Julius, too, I just think that also makes a statement. You went down into Florida. You got two kids from the same high school, two impact players that Miami wanted, that Florida wanted. I don't know what Florida State's doing. I don't know where they are, but Notre Dame's clearly trying to make an impact down in Florida, and you're getting big time players. Zayden Gamble's the best safety in the state of Florida. John Gay III comes from one of the best programs in the state of Florida. Chaminade Madonna. Champ Mons is the best quarterback in the state of Florida in the 27 class. And if you're able to get Julius Jones Jr., and we like where this is trending, I'll have an intel piece I've had intel pieces on the board. Anyone that's a board member has known way before everybody else, before it became trendy to talk about Notre Dame being the team to beat, not Oregon. We were saying on the message board that, I don't buy that Oregon stuff. I think Notre Dame's done a great job in this recruitment. Mike Brown's done a great job. Mike Denbrock's been all over this one. And really like where this thing is headed with him. Just got to close it out. That's the big thing. But you land him, Trevor, and all of a sudden this 27 recruiting class is like, okay, this is a big time class. And I think this would be a very big win for Notre Dame also, because if you can get Julius Jones Jr., you went toe to toe with Oregon twice for kids that they were putting, competitive offers on the board for financially from an NIL standpoint. And an offense that had a first-round draft pick, a quarterback a couple years ago. It's had quarterbacks throw for a bunch of yards over the years. I mean, did Bo have 2 4,000-yard seasons at Oregon, or did he only have one? Let me look here real quick. I know he had at least one. So in 2023, he threw for 4,500 yards, 45 touchdowns, and 3 picks. And then the year before, he only had 3,593 in 13 games. As a team, they threw for 3,700. They would have been over 4,000 if they'd have played one more game that year. But, you're looking at a Trev. And then the next year with Dylan Gabriel, he passes for 3,857 yards and 30 touchdowns. And then Dante Moore comes out this year and throws for over 3,500 yards. We haven't seen that kind of production in Notre Dame in a while. And yet they're going toe-to-toe with that Oregon team and saying, hey, this is what we're doing. And I think that's a very important thing. Very important thing. He's a game changer, Trev. There's just no other way to say it. He's a game changer. He has that kind of potential. And you have to get guys. You have to start winning some of those more of those battles. Like, I think Caden Finley can be that. Bubba Frazier's a different deal. Like, Bubba was a big time pickup, but it's kind of like Anthony Knapp. when I say Notre Dame doesn't have a lot of success going in the South and getting top linemen. Well, what about Anthony Knapp? Anthony Knapp wasn't that. They beat like Georgia Tech for Anthony Knapp. Now, we could look back and say that all those SEC schools screwed up and misevaluated Anthony Knapp, and that's very fair. But you can't be like, well, we went to the South and beat Florida and Miami and LSU and Alabama for that guy, right? Like, you know, I think what we've seen from Notre Dame is, you know, Bubba was that same kind of guy. And nobody was on him yet. You kind of stole him. You snuck him out of the South. You know, you went down there and were like, hey, Bubba, follow us, man. You know, let's get out of here before anybody recognizes who you are. And then when they saw that, you saw teams try to get in late, but he was all about Notre Dame. So that's a different animal. You went down to Texas and beat Texas for a Texas alums kid. That was a big win. Talking about Caden Finley. That was a big win. Beating Clemson for Larry Fitzgerald or Devin Fitzgerald is not the same kind of big win because you're not going into a premier territory. You know what I mean? So it's not that they're not important wins, but going down into Florida and beating Miami, Oregon, premier programs for a kid from South Florida would be that kind of big win. It's another big win. So, again, I'm not trying to take away from Mike Brown. I think the valuation they did on Bubba Frazier was first rate. That was excellent. I'm making the point that, okay, those are good, but can you go toe-to-toe with the big dogs in their backyard and land recruits? Well, so far, there's a couple anomalies. Caden Finley's an anomaly. You could maybe say Braden Finley's an anomaly, but I don't know how hard like Texas and Texas A&M were pushing for him. I think Caden Finley's the one anomaly. Well, if you get Julius Jones Jr., now that's two in back-to-back years. On top of, they're still doing a great job of evaluating those under-the-radar guys like Devin Fitzgerald, like Bubba Frazier, like Jackson Coleman. At Notre Dame, you got to do both at receiver. And so they're doing good with the under-the-radar guys, but now can you go toe-to-toe with the big dogs and get the top guys like Caden Finley last year and Julius Jones Jr. this year? That's another reason why this recruitment means a lot to me and why it matters and why we focus on it. It's not just the type of player you're getting. It's what does it say? That's why Albert Simeon's so important, in my opinion, as a statement recruit. Not only is he a big-time talented offensive lineman that's a great fit at Notre Dame, but can you go down to Louisiana and beat LSU and beat Texas A&M for a stud 5-star offensive lineman from the South? Yeah, great. You can get the kid from a private school in Connecticut. You can get the kid from a private school in Eastern Pennsylvania. You can get the 5-star kid from a private school in Massachusetts or a school in Illinois in Charles Jagasaw. That's great. You went to Michigan last year, got 3 really good offensive linemen. That's great. And I love that. But when there is that right type of kid, when there is that fit at Notre Dame, and Albert Simeon's as good of a fit at Notre Dame as any lineman you'll see in every regard except for where his bed is located, where his home is located, right? That's the only thing we said. We joked in a show once that if you could create out a perfect offensive lineman in a lab, Albert Simeon has almost all of it except for one thing: geography. That's all he's lacking to be the perfect Notre Dame recruit: geography. Can you go win that battle? Well, Joe Rudolph hasn't shown that yet. That's what makes that a big recruitment. You know, same thing at receiver. Can you go down and win another battle, a second battle? Because once is like, okay, it was nice, but it's an anomaly. Do it back-to-back years. That's who you are now. And I think that's absolutely huge. And it's also another former NFL player's kid who would be showing that's eventually going to start meaning something even more than it already does. Like, hey, all these guys that went through it are all sending their kids to Notre Dame. That should tell you something, parents. You know, so we've already got Larry Fitzgerald's kid and Jermichael Finley's kid and Jerome Bettis's kid and Bryce Young's kid. Now you get another, you know, just those things add up. They add up. And so that's why this recruitment is important beyond just your landing an impact receiver. And so I wanted to focus on that. And then 28 class is interesting, Trev. We're not going to dive into names, but I would argue that it's too early for 2028 to start listing a bunch of names. I don't think the 26 season is going to have a huge impact on 27 recruiting. But I think that 28 receiver recruiting, the product you put on the field, I would argue is going to be I don't know that there's a position where the product that we might see this year is more important for recruiting future classes than what the offense shows this year when it comes to receiver recruiting.
Without a doubt. The on-field, this conversation goes all the way back to one of the first things that we talked about at the very start of this show about how the product on the field now has to match the development that they went through in spring. What's one thing that we've talked about a lot this offseason, man? It's the margin for error of this group, because you have a lot of talent and you have a lot of diversity of talent. I know we're not diving into names yet, but there are kids in the 2028 class that can look at certain players on this roster and say, yeah, I could be that for this offense. Not necessarily being thrown to by CJ Carr, because look, if we have questions about him coming back in 2027, he's not coming back in 2028. Actually, I don't even know if he'd be able to. He might, but yeah, point being,
he'd be able to, yeah, because he's a redshirt sophomore this year.
That's
he'd
right.
Be a redshirt junior in 27, but yeah, he ain't gonna be back in 27.
But no,
something
he won't
really bad would have to happen for CJ Carr to be back here in 2028.
100%. So it won't look the exact same in the offense because they won't be getting thrown to by CJ Carr, but they could be getting thrown to by Noah Grubbs or Teddy Gerard or Champ Mons, and they can go through and look at a lot of the players on the roster like, hey, I play a lot like Milin Graham. Hey, I play a lot like Cam Williams. Man, I see a lot of myself in Jordan Faison. That's going to be the on-field impact for the 2028 class. That's why the on-the-field part, because to your point, all of the 27 class will be like wrapped up by the time they travel out to Provo and they play BYU, but the 28 class, there's a lot of kids in that class that fill out this type of skill sets of like, yeah, I could be the next Quincy Porter at Notre Dame.
So you all know I'm a huge Harry Hiestand fan, right? Like as a coach. Think he's one of the best coaches ever. So I don't say this as a shot at Coach Hiestand, and I think he'd probably say this. But let's be honest. All those linemen that committed to Notre Dame under his tenure did not do so because of his charming personality. They did it because of the product they put on the field, and they knew that they were going to go to Notre Dame and get pushed and get cared about, because he cared about his players. He just did it in a an old school kind of way, right? Like, a disciplinarian type of father as opposed to the hugger and the pat on the butt guy, right? I mean, but they knew they're going to get cared for, they're going to get developed, they're going to get pushed, and if they do the work, they're going to have a great shot to go play in the National Football League. That's why. It wasn't because, boy, I just like how many hugs he gives. We start every meeting every day with a big hug from Coach Hiestand. Like that wasn't it. And it's at the end of the day, it's still the product on the field, right? It's the product on the field. And that's why receivers important. Like right now, guys are committing Notre Dame because of what I would argue that it's more because of what the quarterbacks they've signed and what Mike Denbrock did in the past.
Yeah.
More so than what he's done the last 2 years in Notre Dame, because he hasn't had the rosters have been built in a way where you are going to build around the run game. So this is the first year where we do think this is going to be a team that the pass game is more a part of the foundation as opposed to a really efficient and explosive complement to the best running back room in college football. And so that's where I think this year's important. You want to have one of our resident Miami fans is talking about Bryson Wright, who's a stud from Florida. Jalen Adai, who's a stud. There's some 28 receiver classes loaded.
Yeah.
And that's why it's kind of pointless to get into all the names because it's way too early for that. The point, however, is if you want to have a chance to get some of those kids, now you're getting into the category where if you don't start producing, that message doesn't work anymore. Coach, I know you were great in 2023 with, Jaden Daniels and Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas, but you're now 3 years at Notre Dame and you've yet to really put an elite pass game on the field. And I don't mean elite by they've got to throw for 4,500 yards, but where you're putting up numbers and guys are getting drafted high and guys are having really good seasons, and that's what you're kind of building your team around. I think now is when you got to start showing that. We think they're going to. I'm not saying that they won't, but what I'm saying is that's why the 28-6 season is so important to having an ability to impact the 28 receiving core, and why I'm not really worried about where they stand with anybody right now. I'm more concerned about, okay, can they put a product on the field this year that's going to allow them to be a factor next year? And it's going to be absolutely crucial. Can they get some of these young guys on the field and have them produce? Those are all going to be things that go into like, okay, you signed a 5-star receiver. Notre Dame signed a 5-star receiver? Who? Yeah, Quincy Porter. Not out of high school, but they got a 5-star receiver. Does he do anything in Notre Dame, or is he just kind of, he's all right? Now, some of that's on Quincy. I'm just making the point that if you start producing I think I might have said this, but I won't say the name this time. If I said it last time, I'm sorry, but I know of a receiver that I grade out as a borderline 5-star guy that told a friend of mine, told Brian Smith, that if I was a running back, I would have committed to Notre Dame months ago. But he's a receiver. So you know what I mean? Like, you got to go prove it. And that's 100%. Why I think this year is going to be huge for 28 recruiting. The 27 class is hopefully going to be done by the time the season starts. 28, 29 recruiting, this product is going to be different. That's why we're not going to spend a lot of time on names, because there isn't the same kind of, we know who the top guys are like you see at defensive end for 2028. There's a lot of guys they've offered. A lot of guys are trying to get in on. Jalen Adai just visited recently. Who's the kid from Michigan that just visited recently? I think it's me. Give me a second. I'm going to look this up here real quick. They just had a really talented kid from actually Ohio visited recently. Let me look that up here real quick. It was, where's he at? Lorenzo McMullen. It's a really talented kid that's visited this offseason. So, there's a talented top 50 guy from Georgia, Maddox. Where's he at? Maddox Davis, who visited, or he's set up a visit. I mean, they're in on a lot of guys, but like right now, I don't know that I'd predict any of them to go to Notre Dame. How this season goes is where you start to become a factor. Because I think the kids, there's interest in Notre Dame. They're looking for a reason to go to Notre Dame, or at least strongly consider Notre Dame. Now you got to give them one. Why are they cleaning up at running back? Because you can say, come be the next. This is the pitch that Notre Dame has a running back. Listen, buddy, you could come here and in 4 years never start a single game and be a first-round draft pick at running back. That's literally the storyline that Notre Dame can say. Who else can say that? Jadarian Price started a grand total of 0 games in Notre Dame. Somebody was like, he had to have started some games when Jeremiah was banged up. Nope. Jeremiah started every playoff game. Well, you can't even be the number 1 receiver and be a first-round draft pick right now at Notre Dame, at least not since Will Fuller was here. So the product on the field at the end of the day is what convinces kids to come. Top DBs didn't start coming until after Notre Dame started producing dudes. And, that's why I say this is a big year for Notre Dame. Big year. Because here's the thing about Julius Jones Jr. We've said Notre Dame would recruit him no matter who his dad was. No question. Here's the question, Trevor. Would he have looked at Notre Dame as hard as he did early on if he wasn't Julius Jones Jr.? That's a legitimate question. Well, next year there isn't some former Notre Dame Stars kid as one of the top 50 players in the country at wide receiver.
Very true.
So the product on the field's got to back it up.
Brian, in the final part of today's show here in the Irish Breakdown podcast, brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. We've got a daily mailbag to take us home. Spent a lot of time today talking about the wide receivers. We're going to keep that rolling into the daily mailbag. Now, you can ask questions about past receivers, current receivers, future receivers, college football wide receivers, really anything to your guys' liking today. And if this does happen to be your first mailbag, because we have new listeners every day, you can put MB for mailbag or a mailbox emoji before your submission. Lets us know to set it aside. Then super chats also get bumped up to the top.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of super chats, we do have one to kick things off with.
From Maltavius, want to politely remind you all that BD didn't think Jordan Faison deserved a scholarship his freshman year when I suggested it on the board. LOL.
Congrats.
From Jay Melvin, poor old Dabo wants to reminisce on Clemson heydays. Do you think they will have a top 5 wide receiver core this year? P.S. If you want a good rant on old Dabo, make sure to watch the last 20 minutes of Lucky Lefty yesterday.
I bet Sean went off. I haven't listened to it yet, but I bet Sean went off on Dabo. So I think the reaction to Dabo has gone a little overboard in some instances. He wasn't taking a shot at Notre Dame. It was just petty and childish. And it was it just reeked of like, well, so he wasn't like just randomly calling out Notre Dame. He was listing in a defense of the job he's done there. He was like defending his job and the things they've done and advocating for, where the program is going. And, hey, we were in a similar situation back before Taj Boyd and blah, 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 blah. And then he lists all the schools they'd be. Yeah, we're 3-1 against Ohio State, and we're 4, whatever. We beat Alabama championship game twice, and all these other kind of things. And he's like, I'm 4-2 against Notre Dame, and then he just randomly takes a shot at Notre Dame, like they play by their own rules and print money, and I'm like, dude, why was the extra commentary necessary there? It just seemed kind of like, dude, I've defended you. You've always said good things about Notre Dame. Like we've said, Notre Dame is like, they're your example of who you should be and how they run their program. And, I say again, name me the rule that Notre Dame has made up on their own. Well, they get a top 12 playoff spot. Notre Dame didn't make that rule up. They asked for it. They were given it. They can't enforce that rule on college football. And if the worst thing you can come up with is a team argued and got granted special privileges that if they're in the top 12, they'll make a 12-team playoff. Wow. Imagine that. The audacity of those crazy Catholic bastards to ask for that kind of thing. You know what I mean? Like, how dare you ask that you get an automatic bid if you're in the top 12 of a 12-team playoff? Number one, they can't play by their own rules because they have to be granted that access. Number one. Number two, every Power 4 team has the same possibility. Notre Dame has to earn their way into the top 12. Every other team has the right to earn a conference championship. And if you win a conference championship, and it's beginning right now when Notre Dame's special clause goes into effect, you also get an automatic bid, which means the next time a 7-5 team wins the ACC, they get an automatic bid. What's harder, to win the ACC with 3 or 4 losses, or for Notre Dame to be ranked in the top 12 with a committee who can just randomly decide to drop them out of the top 12, even when Notre Dame's not playing, which is exactly what they did this past year. They're still at the hands of the committee. The only way Notre Dame is really guaranteed a spot is if they're a no-brainer top 10 team anyway, and would have got in anyway. Because if Notre Dame's 11th or 12th, guess what the committee's going to do? They're going to drop them down to 13 so they don't have the automatic bid anymore. Like, how do you not get this? And again, it's not a special rule. It's not their own rule. And you know what else is true, Trev? This is going to blow some people away. Did you know that every team has the option, once their current contract with their current league is up, that they can, brace yourself, choose to go be independent? Did you know that?
What?
There's not a special carve-out for Notre Dame to be independent that nobody else has access to. Did you also know, Trevor, that in 1988, the last time Notre Dame won a title, the number 1, 2, 3, and 5 ranked teams in the country were all ... independent teams. Florida State, Miami, and West Virginia. All independent teams. Imagine that. And 3 years later, the NCAA made a rule that everybody other than Notre Dame has to join a conference. Oh, wait, no, I'm sorry. That's actually not what happened. Every team chose to join a conference so they could get TV money. There's one program that was good enough and powerful enough to say, we're going to get our own TV deal. Everybody had access to that, but guess what? You weren't good enough. Nobody cared enough to do that. So I get real frustrated by that. It's just, he's better than that. It's a bad look for a guy that I've spent a lot of time defending over the years, and it just made me kind of not want to do that anymore.
It was very peaked in high school-esque. Your track record from 6 years ago was fantastic. But let's not act like that was last year either. Like, if Notre Dame has all these special carve-out, like, look, legitimately, and I'm being serious here, I would adhere to the Notre Dame can play by its own rules if they had like 8 national championships since the turn of the century. They can make their own TV deal money and they can just pay recruits whatever because they have their own cash machines in the backyard and yada, yada, yada. I would understand that if Notre Dame had 8 titles since 2000. I would accept that argument more so then in that made-up scenario than I do now. But even then, it's still just ridiculous. It's just it is what it is, man. I can't claim this is my own because Dan Patrick said it earlier when he responded to those comments too. He's like, look, dude, you had 9 players drafted and you had 7 wins last year. Notre Dame and Ohio State have nothing to do with that, buddy.
Right.
Like,
right.
That's a
– If Notre Dame would have gone on a title run similar to Bama's, they win it in 09, win it in 11, win it in 12, win it in 15, win it in 17, win it in 20. You can say, look, they're dominating because they play by special privileges. You know, like if it was so great being independent, then why do you all keep trying to tell Notre Dame to join a conference? Why wouldn't some of you be independent? If it gives teams an advantage and you get to play by your own rules, then why didn't Texas go independent? Why hasn't Ohio State gone independent? Why hasn't Georgia gone independent? If it's somehow better and easier and all these special advantages. So it just was tiresome. Now, speaking to the question, because this is a receiver show, I don't know that Clemson definitely has a top 5 receiving core this year, but that says more about the quality of the receiving cores in college football this year than it does Clemson's. I haven't sat down and ranked my top 5, so I can't say definitively when we do that Clemson will be in the top 5, but I can promise you this. They will be in our conversation for the groups that are good enough to be in that top 5, for sure. And when you talk about what they've got coming back is really good, but then also what they got coming in. So not only do they bring back Moore, not only do they bring back Bryant Wesco, they also bring in Naeem Burrows, who I like a lot. They bring in Connor Salmon, who I like a lot. They got the kid from North Carolina, whose name is absolutely escaping me right now, that Notre Dame tried to get in on late last year. I mean, here's the thing is Notre Dame, Clemson kicked Notre Dame's butt in the receiving core last year.
Heck yeah.
Gordon Sellers is the other one. That, Notre Dame, it ended up being good for Notre Dame. They ended up getting a heck of a receiving core, and it worked out well, but they wanted Naeem Burrows. You know, so I look at it and say, can it be a top 5 group this year? Yes. In most years, it's a no-brainer top 5 group, in my opinion. But this year, there's a lot of really good receiving cores. I mean, we were talking about them earlier, Ohio State. You know, are they as good as they've been in the past at 2, 3, and 4? Well, no, I would argue their second most talented players are true freshmen. That hasn't exactly been a limiting thing for top Ohio State receivers in recent years. You know, they haven't needed a couple years to get going. You know, the only time they haven't played as freshmen is when they're just dudes in front of them. Oregon has a really good receiving core coming back. Texas has a really good receiving core coming back. Notre Dame has a really good receiving core coming back. I mean, there's a lot of teams you look around. Arkansas doesn't have one coming back. Theirs is built around Satanga and then a bunch of new guys, but they're in the conversation for what we're talking about. Texas A&M with Mario Craver coming back, the Bethel Roman kid coming back. You've got Isaiah Horton's going to Texas A&M, right?
Yes,
you got him coming in this year. Terry Bussey's still a wide receiver for them. So, there's just a lot of really good receiving cores in college football this year. And that's why I can't definitively say that they'll be top 5, but they're in the conversation certainly this season. So it'll be a good receiving core. I like how he got the receiver reference in there. So I would read the question and got the rant out of me. Jay Melvin is becoming a very savvy podcast questioner here for
As the questions were coming in before we went live, I was waiting to see if anybody was going to ask anything about Clemson. And if not, I was going to hop on to my own YouTube account and put in a question about it and then just put ... wide receiver afterwards. Mm-hmm. So we were going to see but shout out to Jamie Melvin for asking.
Well done, dude. Well done.
From Tommy Guns, is this a make or break year for Cam?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, there's so much youth on the roster, Trevor, that if he doesn't step up this year, it's it's not going to get easier next year when Caden Finley's in year 2, Quincy Porter's in year 2 at Notre Dame. You know, you get Jackson Coleman shows up, Micah Gilbert potentially still around, getting better and better. Devin Fitzgerald's going into year 2. You know what I mean? These younger guys aren't going to get worse. They're going to keep getting better. So if you can't separate from them now, it's not going to happen.
One of the downsides, agreed. And one of the downsides of this transfer portal era, as much as we talked about how much it's benefited Notre Dame in the wide receiver room, the return on investment has a much shorter waiting period than what it did before. And before, when it's like, we waited until, Miles Boykin, like one of his last years to break out in college. And same thing with Chase Claypool. It's like, well, why would you wait now with somebody that does have super, super high upside until their redshirt junior year to break out when you could go get somebody going into their redshirt sophomore year, like a Milin Graham, who is already kind of ahead of you as a football player, not athletically. But that's the downside of this. So for those reasons, I agree. I do think it's a make or break year for Cam as well.
All right, we'll keep rocking and rolling here. We got one from Andrew Gilmore.
When Jaden Greathouse gets back to full strength, would you like to see him play a little bit of boundary receiver?
It's possible. I don't know that I love that as a full-time thing. I think there's things you can do with him in the boundary that he could do. I don't, I kind of like the idea of him. I think where he's coming from is, he can win contested catches and he can, he can catch the ball well, but I like the fact of him doing that from the slot because it gives you a little bit more room to work with. You don't have to be as tall or long to win a slot fade compared to lining up in the boundary against Leonard Moore or against another team's, top boundary, top man player. So I don't know that, I'd make him a full-time boundary, but I'm a big fan of moving guys around. And I think there's certain looks and certain things that I wouldn't mind seeing Jordan Faison in the boundary. And you've got field concepts with him running on crossers and overs and drags. Now, I'm not going to put him there and run a million, hey, let's put Jordan Faison on the boundary and throw a fade, a back shoulder fade to him on 3rd and 9. Like that probably wouldn't be the greatest play call in the world. But there's a lot. I mean, stops, comebacks, stuff he already does to the field, quick game, screen game. But getting him backside of the primary, concept and bringing him on something where you're clearing out. And if that read's not there because they undercut those routes, you're bringing him on a crosser or an over, something like that. I'd certainly love to see stuff like that. That's the one thing I wish we saw a little bit more creativity from the Notre Dame receiving corps is, I'm not saying that your play's got to be different, but what about having Jordan Faison do that instead of your taller, a bit more lumbering boundary receiver? You know what I mean? Just some things like that I would like to see. And Greathouse could certainly do some of those things. But like full-time, yeah, I don't see that. But, to Andrew's question, a little bit of boundary? Absolutely. Absolutely. I could certainly see that.
Agreed. I'm with you, man.
And it would make a lot of sense to do so.
From Salty, Jaden Greathouse has been kept out of games and practices to heal the hamstring, yet he was cleared to play in the final games of last season and fully dressed for the Blue Gold game. Will he be ready?
That's the million-dollar question. I don't know the answer. Here's the thing. I fully expect Jaden Greathouse to be healthy when winter workouts work. I think let's say the Blue Gold game, instead of it being the Blue Gold game was a scrimmage, and that scrimmage counted on, your 2026 season. I think he would play. There's no need to play him in the Blue Gold game. But the point is but can he stay that way? That's more of the question. Will he be ready? I fully expect Jaden Greathouse to be ready when camp starts. What I don't know is, will he stay that way?
Mm-hmm.
That's the big question for Jordan Faison at this point in time. He's got to prove he can be that. And so far he hasn't. All right, we got another one from I'm going to try to get to everybody's one first, and then we'll circle back to get those guys.
From Aiden Benami, say Julius Jones Jr. commits. Would you take Osani Gales as well? Just saw his top 5 was released.
I would. I'm not a fan of turning down talented receivers, but I think when I look at Notre Dame, they're in a position to say that, I think they're in a position to kind of feel like they would be able to say no to that. So I think too is as long as now here's the thing is if Osani Gales, let me start over here. If Osani Gales wanted to commit to Notre Dame, and because I'm pulling up his top 5 now. It was like Notre Dame was in it. I think A&M was in it. I believe. Yeah, it's Tennessee, Alabama, Washington, and Stanford. He's a California kid that's playing at IMG. So he's got 2 SEC schools, 2 West Coast schools, and Notre Dame. And he's going to be taking official visits. If he committed to Notre Dame first, then I think they'd take 3. If he doesn't commit to Notre Dame first, I don't know that they're going to take 3. That's at least where they are now. My hope is that they sit down and say, hey, we got a couple kids on this board that are too good to say no to, Osani Gales being one. Okay, we're done at receiver except if we get a stud, and he's kind of a stud. But here's a little bit of the issue too. He's kind of similar to Julius Jones Jr. In style of play, body type, and all that. I think you could use them similarly to how you use Greathouse and Faison, but that I think factors in a little bit as well. And you signed 3 guys like that last year. So, and Finley and Frazier and Braden Robinson. So I would understand if they only took 2. As of right now, I think that they're looking to only take 2. But he might be one of those guys, and I haven't been told this one or the other, Trevor. He might be one of those guys where Notre Dame says, yeah, we met our numbers and we got a stud. Let's just say hypothetically Julius Jones Jr. committed. I'm just for argument's sake. But we can't say no to that kid. We got to keep recruiting that kid. If we don't get him, who cares? If we do get him, then now we're really cooking. That's what I would do if I was Notre Dame. And I don't know that they've made that decision yet because, they've only got 1 receiver in the class right now. So you're certainly not going to make that decision today.
From Black Irish 864, our guy Christopher Galloway, with the depth at the wide receiver position, will we see more of a fast-paced offense from time to time?
I just don't know that that's necessarily Mike Denbrock's DNA to really move quickly. I would like to see them push the tempo a little bit at times. I don't even, I'm at the point now where I don't even love using the word tempo because I think that means something in football that I don't think Notre Dame is going to do or should do. I don't want to see Notre Dame playing like Oregon 2010. That's not what I'm talking about. What I do think we need to see Notre Dame do is play with some pace. Hey, we complete a pass. We're getting down there and we're getting lined up and we're going to kind of get them on their heels. Now you can smoke it and look over at the sideline and, snap it. And it's a smoke call, meaning you're not going to snap the ball and you're just trying to get them to jump off or get a look, have them line up. And then you look over and run it, or they may give you a new call, whatever the case may be, but just play with a little bit more pace. At times, I think that would be a great change-up where you could really then force teams to say, you better be prepared to have a real basic call package on defense. If you want to be able to be prepared for that when Notre Dame does that. I would like to see that. I just don't know that that's who Mike Denbrock wants to be. I think it'd be really effective.
I do too. Chris, I think one of the things that having a deeper wide receiver room could also do is more diversity amongst route concepts. I think one of the reasons why we saw a lot of like outs, hitches, slants, like shorter stuff on top of the, the vertical routes that we would see in last year's offense is because they rotated 3 guys. They get gassed. I think you could see a lot more deep overs. I think you could see more slot fades in this year's offense because you have guys with fresher legs that can all come in because the room is deep. So I think that's another thing on top of hopefully pushing the pace because I'm also a fan of that as well.
Yep, agree.
From Juan Delgado, with Micah Gilbert not having the best end of the spring, is the staff banking on Quincy to be that dude on the outside when he's full go in the summer and fall?
Now, keep in mind, this is our assessment. The staff may not view it the same way we do. This is what we saw. Or they may view how he performed the last 2 practices the same way we do, but he was so good in the ones before that they may not have the same concern that there. I just want to be clear. We are not saying that the Notre Dame coaches were disappointed by Micah Gilbert's performance this spring, and now he's hanging on to the boundary job by a thread. That's not what we're saying. I just want to make sure we're all clear. I'm giving you my opinion of Micah Gilbert in the boundary position from what we saw. Well, we saw not nearly as much as what Mike Denbrock and Mike Brown saw. So I think the reality is the reason they went out and got Quincy Porter is because they thought he had a chance to be that dude no matter what Micah Gilbert or Cam Williams or anybody else did in the boundary. but he's got to also go prove it. And Micah Gilbert not having the best end of the spring is still better than what Quincy Porter did this spring, which was absolutely nothing. So I'm not ready to jump there yet. Micah Gilbert is, to me, still goes into the fall, and without a doubt, my number one boundary receiver on the first day of fall camp. Now the question is, can you hang on to it? Or are you going to get passed up by Cam or Quincy Porter or Devin Fitzgerald if he keeps doing what he's doing? You know what I mean? So I just want to make sure we're clear on that. But I think the Notre Dame staff paid Quincy Porter pretty good money to get him out of the portal because they expect him to eventually be that dude in the boundary. Will that be this year? Will that be next year? Will that be never? That remains to be seen. But I think that was always the expectation. Somebody's going to have to beat him out.
Yep. From D. Lippard 14, will Devin Fitzgerald be a starter for y'all this year? I'm an Arizona State fan, so I know very little about this team.
Probably not. Look, he had a great spring. I think Notre Dame views him as a guy that eventually could be an impact player. I don't think there's any doubt about that. I don't think that they think that there's a lot of thought that he's going to come out and be that guy in day one. Now, Devin had a great spring, but he had that great spring going against other freshmen and walk-on players. That doesn't take away from how excited we are because your height's your height, your speed's your speed, your ball skill's your ball skills. But it's viewed differently than if he was making all those plays against Leonard Moore and Mark Zachary and Dallas Golden and Christian Gray and Jaden Sanders. It'd be a little bit of a different conversation. What I think he's done is put himself in a position where, like, hey, he's going to earn the right to go be able to battle against those guys in the fall. That's what I think the spring was for Devin. But do I have a little bit more faith that he's eventually going to be a starting player at Notre Dame than I did maybe before spring started? Yeah, for sure. For sure. Trev's always been on the Devin Fitzgerald kind of bandwagon. I like him a lot as a player. I ranked him as a top 250 player coming out, 4.5-star upside, but I thought it was more going to be way down the road. I think he showed enough this spring that he's going to be on the field a lot sooner than expected.
Agreed.
A lot sooner than expected.
Agree completely. Also, welcome to the show.
Yeah, absolutely.
From Black Irish 864, did Chris Tyree make it to the NFL?
He got some tryouts, but he didn't stick. He didn't catch on a team.
From Nick Raymond, who is the wide receiver that Notre Dame needs to level up the most?
Oh, man. This is much more debatable than it's been in the past, Trevor.
Agreed.
I think you can make a case for Jaden Greathouse. I think Jaden Greathouse playing to his full potential this year gives you a very unique weapon that nobody else is. Milin Graham dominating the slot is going to look different than Jaden Greathouse dominating the slot. And I personally would rather have Jaden Greathouse's version and then let Milin kind of move all. He play some X, play some Z. And Milin I would rather see into the boundary even than Greathouse or some of those, Faison, some of those other guys because of what he can bring to the table. But you could argue him. You could argue Micah Gilbert. You could argue Quincy Porter. You could argue Cam Williams. But those are those are the five that I would argue along with Milin Graham. You have to throw Milin Graham in there. They need one of those five, in my opinion. Don't need. It would be incredibly beneficial if one of those five kind of, as you say, levels up the most this offseason because they all have very unique skills that they're going to need if they want to go compete for a championship. If Quincy Porter's as good as we all hope he can be, that's a game changer. That's a 6'4". He'll end up being 210, 215 by the time we get to the fall. Vertically oriented, long-armed boundary receiver. You don't have anybody else like that on the roster. He can be a game changer. If Cam Williams, the light goes on and he levels up the most, you've got a 6'2", 205, 210-pound kid that runs a mid to low 4.4, can jump like crazy, and can do things after the catch. Yeah, I'll take that. You can go on and on and on. I think if I had to pick three, I would go Greathouse in no particular order. I'll just go oldest to youngest. So I will go particular order, oldest to youngest. Greathouse, Cam Williams, Quincy Porter. Of all of them, I think one of those three can have the biggest impact if they were to level up. those three guys at their best is even more impactful than the other guys at their best. That includes Milin Graham, because Milin Graham being at his best this year is going to be a dominant player. But I feel like there is his skill set exists to a degree on the roster already. And there's not a lot of difference between him and Jordan Faison's as far as how they play the game outside of size. So that's why I'd say there. But if it's Milin Graham, then I'm more than thrilled. If it's Micah Gilbert, I'm thrilled. I just think those three, just a little bit different type of cats. What say you, Trev?
I think if I only had to pick one, because I agree with your five. If I only had to pick one, I would say Cam Williams. For a lot of the reasons that we discussed earlier. If I had to pick a top three, I would probably go. I would go Cam Williams, Quincy Porter, and then probably one of Greathouse or Micah Gilbert. My only thing with Greathouse, it's not like if I just see what him to varying degrees of what he was against Penn State and Ohio State, like that's his version of like leveling up. Jaden Greathouse's version of leveling up is his health bar. I guess if we're sticking with this leveling up, video game kind of analogy, that's the leveling up I need to see from him. I've seen what like a peak Jaden Greathouse, like I can't imagine a world where he is better than what he was against Penn State and Ohio State. Now we just need to see it to varying degrees more consistently throughout the season. But the leveling up I need to see from Jaden Greathouse is being healthy. And then I'm cool. But yeah, it's some combination of those guys.
Agree.
From Jay Melvin, knock on wood while I say this, but if Malachi Toney went down, Miami would still have a top 10 wide receiver core. Would they still have a top 10 receiving core? This is it at X. Josh Moore and Cam Vaughn. At slot, they have Vandrevius Jacobs. At Z, they have Cooper Barcotti and Samarian Wingo.
That's absolutely still a top 10 receiving core.
Yeah.
In my opinion. I mean, like let's just kind of look at it, right? Number one, you have Cooper Barcotti coming back, who was a 1,000-yard receiver in a Power 4 league last year. This isn't like he transferred from the Sun Belt, or like he originally did in Ivy League school. He is a guy that transferred in with a 1,000-yard season in the league that he's transferring into. So we have an idea of how his game is going to translate. They got Vandrevius Jacobs from South Carolina, who last year in the SEC had 32 catches for 548 yards, 17.1 per catch, and had 4 touchdowns. He ended the season with a 7-catch, 141-yard performance against Clemson. He also had a 128-yard performance against Missouri and a 108-yard performance against Kentucky. He didn't just go throw up a bunch of yards against South Carolina State and Coastal Carolina and bad teams. He had legit games against good opponents. And he's a player that's productive. They also have Cam Vaughn coming in from West Virginia, who last season had 35 catches for 541 yards. Now, I think he's a little bit more complimentary, where I think if Vandrevius Jacobs is like your number two, that's a legit number two receiver who's an impact guy. Cam Vaughn is more of that's a great number three to have, right? Like that's more of his game, but that's still a pretty good player, Trev. That's a guy that, last year in a loss to TCU had 6 catches for 85 yards, and against Utah, top 15 team, had 3 catches for 62 yards on the road against Arizona State, 3 for 79. In the year before at Jacksonville State, because he's now transferring for a 3rd straight year, had 48 catches for 803 yards the year before. And so this is a guy that's played a lot of football the last couple of years. To go with a young, talented player in Josh Moore, who's a former top recruit, very talented. Samarian Wingo is a really good rotation player. That's a real good 5-man group, even if you take Malachi Toney out. Now, are they among the top 5 in the country? No, they fall out of the top 5. But they're closer to 5 than they are 10, in my opinion, even if they lose Malachi Toney. I would say right now, I think that's the best receiving core in college. With all due respect to Texas, Texas's room probably has the most potential. I would say that. I think Miami's right now, of what we know right now about teams, is my number one, probably going to be my number 1 ranked receiving core in the country when we do our preseason rankings. Just because you have 2 proven Power 5 1,000-yard receivers that have played big in big moments. On top of all the rest of the stuff we talked about. The portal was good to Miami's receiving core this offseason.
Oh,
it was very good. Because you already had Tony coming back, but if that's all you had, they're just take him out of the game with their game plan and say, make Josh Moore beat you or make some more Wingo beat you. You can't really do that now. Because if you're like, well, we're going to make somebody else beat you. Like, oh, okay. Take your pick. Jacobs, Barcotti, Josh Moore, Cam Vaughn. Who would you like us to beat you with since you want to take Malachi out of the game? Because let's be honest, taking Malachi out of the game is going to require more than one guy for everybody except like maybe Notre Dame. Maybe Notre Dame. With all due respect to Mekhi Lemon, I'm a little bit more nervous about Malachi Toney than I am Mekhi Lemon. That's my opinion, Trev. Do you agree with that? Do you think there's still a top 10 group if you take him out?
Yeah, I do, especially because of some of the portal acquisitions. I'm with you. From Ballpeen Shillelagh, how similar is Bubba Frazier's skill set to Braden Lindsey's?
Not very. Bubba's thicker than Braden was, and they're both fast. I think Bubba is more of an after-the-catch guy than what Braden was. Braden was a guy that could make plays with the ball in his hands, but it was more on like a straight line speed. We did the reverse against USC. What year was that? Was that 17? Was it? Yeah, it was 19.
19.
No, it was 19. And he catches that reverse against USC. We have the jet sweep against Boston College. He just kind of catches it and runs up the sideline. You think of the post route against Navy where he catches it on the run and goes for a touchdown. He wasn't a guy that was necessarily like had some wiggle the way that Bubba does. Bubba's a stronger. Bubba's almost like once he catches the ball, he's a running back. Like that's kind of how Bubba is. Like he's a receiver up until he catches the ball, then he becomes a running back. So, but you can do a lot of similar things that you did with Braden. What I think Bubba provides you is more after the catch ability and things you can do with him there. I don't know that I'm throwing a bunch of screens to Braden Lindsey unless it's a tunnel screen where it's like you want to crease it and go. Not a lot of stuff where you want him to like make a bunch of guys miss. You're doing work with him on reverses and then down the field stuff. That's where he was dangerous. Bubba's could do those things, but Bubba's also going to have a lot of stuff where you're trying to get him the ball quickly and things along those lines. So there's some carryover, but I'd say that it's pretty different.
Agreed. Bubba's like a faster version of Jordan Faison with what he can do, like with the ball in his hands and after the catch.
Yeah, I agree.
From Timecone 57, which 3 to 4 players are fast enough to take the top off the defense?
Cam Williams, certainly. If we're just talking about taking the top off with just speed, Cam Williams, Quincy Porter, and certain looks, Jordan Faison in certain looks, play action, different things like that. And then, and same thing, Milin Graham of the non-freshmen. I think Bubba will get there, but Bubba's fast enough, but Bubba's got to learn the technical aspects of the game to take the top off. Those would be my top, I'd say 4 to 5 guys that I would view as, if I'm looking to take the top off guys, it would pick someone from that group. Now, Micah Gilbert can do some things in that regard too, but I don't know that I'm going to like make a living designing a bunch of goes and posts and things like that where I'm trying to get Micah Gilbert to outrun the defense. He's a little faster than some people think, but he's still not, to me, what those guys are.
Agreed. From Raymond Hartman, which wide receiver for Notre Dame would have the biggest breakout impact for the 26th season, Graham or Porter?
Yes. Being a little bit sarcastic with you, Raymond, look, they're both going to, if either of them breaks out, it's a huge impact. Huge impact. If I had to pick one, I'd go with Quincy Porter, and it's for the same reason I said earlier. If Milin Graham doesn't pan out, but Jaden Greathouse does, you're great. You've got Faison and Greathouse to the field. And then Milin Graham's your number 3. He doesn't necessarily add something that you can't get from other guys. That's my point. It's not that this guy's better or that. It's just you've already kind of got a really impactful field guy. What you don't have on the roster right now is a big, tall boundary receiver that can do some of the things that you did with Malachi last year, or Miles Boykin or Chase Claypool. And Quincy Porter brings that. So this isn't and I like that you phrase it this way of like, who's better, Quincy Porter or Milin Graham? Well, like, they're different players, and I give all these justifications, but you asked it real specifically, which I think brings about a pretty easy answer for me, which is whose breakout has the bigger impact. And that's why it's kind of easy for me to, if I have to pick one, to pick Quincy Porter, just because of the position he plays. They don't really have a proven player where he plays. Where Milin plays, literally the top pass catcher in 24 and the top pass catcher in 25, two different guys, both come back. So, like, you're still going to be okay. Quincy gives you something that you just don't have on the roster. That's why. So it's not a Graham versus Porter thing. I think the way you asked it was perfect, which is if they both break out, who has the bigger impact? And that to me would be Quincy Porter. And I'll say this, if they both break out, good luck stopping this offense this year. If they both break out and you've got Jaden Greathouse and you've got Jordan Faison, good luck.
Yeah.
Good luck. Along those same lines, let's just bring this one up from Tommy here real quick.
Will Milin Graham be wide receiver 1 at season's end?
Can he? Yes, he can. Would I predict that he will? No, I won't. But I wouldn't be shocked if he did. Like, you know what I mean, Trev? It's like, I'm not predicting it. It's a guy with 6 career catches. I'm not going to get into this, like, let's overhype him and put unfair pressure on him that he just can't live up to. It's more about, like, he could eventually get there, but, like, it's more about there's 2 pretty darn good football players already on the roster that have been in the battles. You know, like I said, Jaden Greathouse has a semifinal game where he had more catches and more yards in that game than Milin Graham's had his whole career. And then a national championship game where he equaled Milin Graham's career catches and passed him in yards and touchdowns against Milin Graham's team in the championship game. So, like, I'm not ready to just be like right off Jaden Greathouse and Jordan Faison as being wide receiver 1 next year. So I'm not. I just don't want to put that kind of pressure on Milin Graham. But would I be shocked if he became wide receiver 1 by season's end? Not really. But I'll say this, he's going to have to be a special kind of stud because he's not going to be wide receiver 1 because Faison and Greathouse aren't also good. It's just going to be because he's that good that you can't, it's inevitable. You can't deny him that he's that guy. And that'd make for a very fun year. Very fun year.
From Acupuncture, can Logan Saldate make the field in any kind of way?
Yeah, he can. I mean, there's a lot of these questions that, look, you ask me about any scholarship receiver. The only guys that I would say would shock me if they made the field in any kind of way are Dylan Faison and Braden Robinson, simply because they're behind the 8 ball, having not practiced all spring. And so it would surprise me a little bit if they made the field in their freshman. And Braden Robinson's still coming back from a knee injury. So, yeah, those 2 guys in 2026, it would surprise me. Pick any of the other 13 wide receivers, and it would not shock me if they see the field in some kind of way as a 1 or a 2. Wouldn't shock me at all. And I definitely think he'll be getting in the game in mop-up minutes. Yeah. For sure, at the very least. So, no, it wouldn't shock me. I'm not predicting it, but it wouldn't surprise me.
From ND Football 115, does the lack of Porter in the spring make you worry about his readiness to start Boundary at the start of the season? Even if so, do you still expect him to start regardless day 1?
I'll go backwards. I only expect him to start if he wins the job. I don't think, like we said this earlier, I think Notre Dame recruited him with the thought that he's going to come in and kind of be that guy. But it's not something we're just going to hand it to him. Like, there was nobody who was going to challenge Malachi Fields last year. Nobody. He was too experienced, and they weren't as good or experienced enough. It's a different animal this year. Micah Gilbert's now a junior, and he's played meaningful downs. Cam Williams, Micah Gilbert's played more meaningful snaps than Quincy Porter and Milin Graham have combined. You know, Cam Williams is every bit as talented as any receiver on the roster, and he's now a junior as well. So he's going to have to earn it. So I don't think this is expect him to start regardless type of thing. He's going to have to earn it. And if he doesn't come ready to play, then he won't earn it and he won't start. But I think that the thought is his talent is such that they think he's going to come in and eventually become that guy. Does the lack of spring make me worry about his readiness to starting the Boundary? No, not really. The only thing that makes me question his readiness is the fact that he's coming back from an injury. and that there's just not as much work you can do. If I knew he just was still at Ohio State and had to finish up some classes at Ohio State, he's fully healthy, but kind of like what Bo Collins and Malachi Fields, neither one of them were there this in the spring. Now they had more experience, but Leonard Moore wasn't an early enrollee at Notre Dame, and he was a freshman All-American. I don't think Benjamin Morrison was an early enrollee. I might be wrong on that, but I don't think he was. And he was a freshman All-American. And he was the best corner on the team by like the middle of fall camp as a true freshman. Like, it was obvious he was going to be that dude. If he's good enough, then he'll be fine. You get all summer workouts and then 25 practices in the fall to get to that point in time. So does he have some ground to make up? Sure. Does it make me worry about his readiness? No. It's missing all the workout time and stuff because of the rehab that makes me be worried about his readiness. That's a big part. But here's the thing about him this spring. What was a little different is he was in every meeting and at every practice this spring because he was on campus. He just couldn't perform. So as long as he's mature enough to understand the value in getting mental reps, then he'll be further along than maybe we think he will be. He'll be further along, and he'll know the offense better than what Malachi Fields did on June 1st last year because he better anyway. So it just depends about how much he works.
Yeah, I'm with you, man. The reason why I'm not nervous about it or worried about it is because they're not asking him to have to come in and start. It's a different scenario. So that's what makes me feel a lot better about it.
Got a super chat from Daily Comments. Says, thanks for the shout out, BD. Hey, you're welcome, man. We'll call him like we see him. We appreciate your contributions, just like we do Insured by Big. I didn't forget about you, Big, just like we do Archer. So, and we miss, what was his name? The Alabama fan. His last name was Martin. I think his first name started with an L. But yeah, he used to be on here for a while, and then his mom got sick. So unfortunately, he hasn't been with us for a while. And then we have a super chat from Tom Connor. Thoughts on Osani Gales? I talked a little bit about this earlier, Tom. Appreciate the super chat, but he's a really good football player. He was, I would argue, Miami or IMG's best receiver last year. It was either him or Eric McFarland. Really shifty receiver, has good vertical speed, good route runner, good after the catch, solid size. He's built similarly to Julius Jones Jr. He's really a lot like Julius Jones Jr. I think Julius is a little bit better, but he's really similar to him. If Osani Gales is let's say Julius shocked me and picks Oregon, and then Osani Gales shocks me and picks Notre Dame, because I would not predict Notre Dame to be the team that gets him right now. I'm still feeling pretty good about the 1-2 punch at receiver, because you're getting a very similar player to Julius. He's just not quite as good, in my opinion, as what Julius is. He's still a good football player. Certainly a good football player.
Sure.
Yep. All right, let's get to some more, Trev. Let's get some people we have not got yet. Thank you again for that super chat, Tom. We got one from here we go, from another of our resident Miami fans, from Spencer. Let's get this one, Trev.
The hype around the wide receiver room is around depth. Does Notre Dame have the same or better caliber of starters as 25, though? Who matches Fields' impact? Greathouse's if he regresses from missing 25 and spring.
Well, so who matches Fields' impact? I don't know the answer to that question. But the thing I would say is there are guys that can. Because here's the thing about Malachi Fields. As good as he was when targeted, he wasn't targeted a ton. I mean, he finished the year with, what was it, like 42 catches? Trev, let me pull up. Or was it 39? What ended up being? Give me a second. Boy, Notre Dame's down there. 36 catches for 630 yards and 5 touchdowns. I think there's several players that can match that level of production. Could they match his impact in the big moments and things like that? That's a more legitimate question. But his production won't be that difficult to replace. I think there's a world in which a couple guys are tasked with replacing what he does. It's Quincy Porter and Micah Gilbert, or Quincy Porter and Cam Williams, or Cam Williams and Micah Gilbert. I think it's going to be more of a by committee approach. But if Quincy Porter is as good as what the Notre Dame coaches think he can be, I would not be shocked at all if he matches Micah Gilbert, Malachi Fields' production and impact in the big moments. The other side, you're getting a Jordan Faison who's a year older. Go ahead, Trev, if you want to interject there. Go for it.
No, go ahead. Mine's a different train of thought. My apologies.
Yeah. Then you've got Jordan Faison stepping up, and he's back. So, and he's got a full year under his belt. And you're not replacing Jaden Greathouse from last year. You're replacing Will Pauling, who was a nice player for Notre Dame last year, had 26 catches, 381 yards, 6 touchdowns, and did some good things. Good blocker, great leader in the locker room, was a team captain. I don't want to act like it's like anyone with a pulse can walk out there and replace what Will Pauling brought to the table. That's not the case. But if Jaden Greathouse is healthy, he's better than Will Pauling. He just is. And so you're better there. So even if you're not quite as good in the boundary, you're better at the 2 field spots, in my opinion. Plus, you've added someone like a Milin Graham to where, you're replacing KK Smith with Milin Graham. I think that's an upgrade. You're replacing Micah Gilbert as the number 2 boundary with a year older version of Micah Gilbert, or possibly Cam Williams, or possibly Quincy Porter, depending on who the starter is. So I certainly think the caliber of the starters can be as good, if not better, than it was last year, because Jaden Greathouse caught 4 passes last year. So if I were to say, my prediction would be they're going to be better at slot, better at X, not quite as good at boundary, but as a whole, better. Plus, because of the depth, you're not asking your starters to play as many snaps, which should, in theory, make them more effective as well. So it's not just the depth that has us excited about it. And that's kind of the point we're making, Spencer, is I think people are sleeping on the proven production that Notre Dame has coming back at receiver next year. It's not like it's a bunch of guys and we don't really know who they're going to be or what they're going to do in big moments, right? Like there aren't a lot of teams that have guys there's not a lot of receiving corps that have more playoff highlights than what, like if you were to make the highlight reel for Faison and Greathouse, maybe Jeremiah Smith and Malachi Toney maybe could have a similar playoff highlight, but that's about it of guys that have done it in the postseason. So my hype about the receiver room isn't just about the depth. It's also, I think their starters are better than people give them credit for. I think people think Notre Dame's just got a bunch of try-hard, former walk-on, guys that they try real hard. They're really smart players. I think people discount how athletic and productive that duo has been in their careers.
Yeah, Spencer, that's a little bit of my, I guess, pushback, I guess you could call it. I don't completely disagree because depth is a piece. That's not the only reason why we think Notre Dame has a top 10 receiving unit in the country. It's not because if they lose 6 guys, guy number 7 could step in and be a serviceable wide receiver. It's because of the loaded talent and potential within the starting lineup. Because like we talked about earlier, we don't think we've seen the best of Jordan Faison. We haven't seen the best in terms of consistency with Jaden Greathouse. We haven't seen Milin Graham play a Notre Dame game like in an actual game. We saw him in the blue gold game. We haven't seen Quincy Porter put on the pads yet. We watched Cam Williams take that jump. Those are all guys that I listed off that could potentially be in the 6-man rotation. If you want to categorize that as depth, go for it. I understand it. But not every team is going to be like Miami's, where Malachi Toney and Cooper Barcotti are going to be on the field 95% of the time. We very well could see a true 6-man rotation in Notre Dame's wide receiver corps this year. So that's why it's not just the depth. It's not because we think they're a top 10 unit because Bubba Frazier is looking like what we thought he was going to coming out of high school, or because Devin Fitzgerald is a year ahead of schedule. That's just kind of like the gravy on top. That's kind of how I view it. But to your point, though, Spencer, depth is a part of it. I don't want to discount that, but it's not the sole reason why. That's for sure.
Good. I think that's a fair question.
100%.
Like, I'm like, what are you talking about, dude? You're disrespecting Notre Dame's. I think they're being overlooked, but I think that's a fair question, especially from someone who's not a Notre Dame fan, who hasn't listened to us break this group down 50 times like
Absolutely.
Notre Dame fans have. I think it's a fair question. And I think it's also the other fair question is, does Notre Dame have that dog that Miami has, that Ohio State has, that Texas has, that maybe Oregon has if DeCorian Moore has the breakout he might have? I think that's more of a fair question than comparing the 26 Notre Dame starters to the 25 Notre Dame starters.
Yeah.
I think that's more of the legitimate, okay, can you rank them high as those teams without that? And I think that's more of the fair question when you talk about where Notre Dame ranks among the top 10 to 15 receiver rooms. I think that's the bigger question to me than how do they stack up against last year's starters.
From Salty, will Jaden Greathouse and Milin Graham have a full competition for starting slot receiver in fall camp?
Absolutely. I mean, Jaden Greathouse not being able to practice this spring opened up the opportunity for Milin Graham to say, I deserve to battle for the starting job. Just flat out.
Yeah. Compound that with Milin Graham's performance in the spring. It's not like just by default he's going to be in that conversation because Greathouse was injured. He also made plays in the slot for Notre Dame. So, yeah, definitely an open battle. It's going to be very competitive.
Another one from Salty. He says, if Julius Jones Jr. commits to the Irish, will Coach Brown have solidified his position as a top recruiter for the Irish? No, because I think he'll get discounted a little bit because it is a former great's son, a former Notre Dame great's son. I think there'll be a little bit of a discount. I think there is still another level that he needs to prove that I don't know that he can answer until 2028. Now, that may be fair or not. I'm just saying like what the perception is. Like, well, great. The best player you've landed so far is the son of one of the all-time greats at Notre Dame. Like, I don't know he'll get the credit as a top recruiter if that's his biggest win. You could argue that's not fair, and I would probably agree with you because I don't think Julius Jones Jr. is coming to Notre Dame just because his dad went here. Like, they had to earn that recruitment if they get him. So, but I just don't know that he'll get the credit. I think next year's the year that, as long as he's still around, is the year that he gets a chance to really prove himself. But I just think the steady growth is what I've liked to have seen. You know, identify your numbers. Are you a good evaluator of players? Yes. Can you build relationships? Yes. And can you get guys to sign on the dotted line? Yes. I mean, those are all things he's done so far. But I don't know if he completely is. I mean, I don't know that you can put him on the level of Joe Rudolph, who's if he gets Albert Simmons this class, he'll have landed a 5-star offensive lineman each of the last 4 year classes. I don't know that you can put him on the level of what class Charlie Partridge has a chance to land this year if he closes out with Fuller Runshoe and Abraham Cisse and Braden Parks and Jackson Vaughn to go with Aiden O'Neill. It's like my dude has done more in a year than most of the Notre Dame coaching staff have done. You know, does that put him on the same level as what Jaywan Sider's done so far? I don't know that does it for the reasons I mentioned. I think next year's the year that Mike Brown can truly silence any recruiting questions. I think everyone will acknowledge if he gets Julius, like, okay, he's a good recruiter. No doubt. Your question was, is he a top recruiter? Well, I mean, if he gets Julius Jones Jr., is his resume better than Gino's? I don't think so. Is it better than Jaywan Sider so far? Debatable. I don't think so. Is it better than Joe Rudolph's? No. Would it be better than what Charlie Partridge might do in this class? Maybe not. You know, Aaron Henry he's a little bit of a TBD because half his class is already recruited when he got here, you know, but like, is it as good as what Mike Mickens was doing? No. That's more of a testament to how good the staff is at recruiting than it is a shot at Mike Mickens. I'm just simply saying, I don't know that he'll get the credit for landing the son of a former player that puts him on the same level as Jaywan Sider getting Javian Osborne and Jonas Walton and Lathan Wissington and Isaiah Rogers. Does that make sense? Like, I'm not saying Absolutely. It's fair. I'm just saying I think that's where I think that would be. Yeah. All right, let's get a few more here, Trev, before we get out of here. We got one from we got another one from Ballpeen Shillelagh.
Of Devin Fitzgerald, Bubba Frazier, Elijah Burris, and Jerome Bettis Jr., who do you think will make the biggest on-the-field impact this season?
Of those three, Trev, I think it's Bubba Frazier because I think he's the one guy that has the best chance to also help on special teams.
Yeah, agreed. I would also go with Bubba Frazier.
Got one from Zach Nichols.
Knowing what we know about the 2027 class of potential targets, do you wish Notre Dame would have treated 2026 wide receiver recruiting differently or taken less commits?
That's a great question and a very fair question. My answer to that, though, is a very emphatic no. Number one, you know, what's the expression about the bird in the hand or whatever. You know what I mean? I also think that I don't know that there's a lot of 26 guys that now, like, if you'd have told me 2 months ago, if Notre Dame gets these two guys, Jackson Coleman and Julius Jones Jr., they can't take Cade Cooper because they took Devin Fitzgerald, would you trade that? I might consider it. I might have considered it 2 months ago. Having watched Devin Fitzgerald in spring practice, I'm like, nope. You know what I mean? Like, my opinion has changed a little bit. And now you see why the staff was so high on him and why Notre Dame and Clemson and some other programs were really pushing hard to get him down the stretch. So, I mean, who do you say no to? Dylan Faison, the number one lacrosse player in the country, was a better high school receiver than his brother, who's currently your best receiver. You say no to Braden Robinson, who might be the most dynamic athlete on your roster, and if he's not, it's Bubba Frazier. Is it Caden Finley, who's a top 100 receiver? Like, who do you say no to? So you can get another guy who's similarly talented. So, no, I wouldn't have turned those guys down at all, knowing what we know now about the 27 class. I wouldn't have. And I think they needed that infusion of talent as well.
Yeah, and I'm also, and this is just me, personal philosophy, I also wouldn't let future potential recruiting classes dictate the current recruiting class.
Yeah.
Of like, hey, like let's kind of throttle down on this recruiting class because look at the board in 2027. It's like, well, yeah, then you're putting all of your chips on that table for like, okay, well, since you intentionally didn't recruit heavily in the 2026 class, you have to land these guys in 2027. And that's a much more precarious spot to be in than the former.
Let's get one from Time Cone.
Who starts more games in 2026, Ashton Craig or Jaden Greathouse?
I hope it's Ashton Craig, and here's why I say that. I hope that he starts all 15 games this year, and there's a couple games that Jaden Greathouse technically doesn't start because they go 12 personnel. That's my cheating answer. I in theory, you'd like them both to be healthy all season, and I get why he's asking the question, but who's got the better possibility? Well, I'd say that's probably Jaden Greathouse, because we've only seen Jaden Greathouse get injured in a season once and miss any significant time. I think he missed one game as a freshman, missed no games as a sophomore, and then, of course, had this stuff last year. Ashton Craig has literally had each of his last 2 seasons ended by an injury, and basically the same injury. It's been a knee both times. So I'd say Jaden Greathouse, but I hope that it's tied for 15. Or if it's, Craig's more, it's because there was a couple 12 personnel starts of the game, and they had Faison and whoever the W is in the starting lineup.
From Tommy Guns, did Denbrock use more and more effective receiver motions and shifts at LSU and prior stints at Notre Dame? Do you expect more this year?
No, he's never been a huge motion and shift guy. I'd say he did a little bit more of that at LSU in 2023. Just off the gut of breaking them down. I think he used more motions and shifts last year than he did this past season, or 2 years ago in 24 than he did this past season. I hope that we see a little bit more than that. I'm sure whether it's short motion, stack motion, zipper motion, full across motion, orbit motion. I think there's a lot of advantages to moving guys pre-snap. I understand maybe why you didn't want to do it last year, because you had a freshman quarterback but here's the thing, when you move, the defense moves. When you got a rookie quarterback, I don't know that you want the defense moving a whole lot when the ball snapped. I mean, maybe that's why they didn't do it as much last year, but I hope we see a little bit more than that of that this year. I do.
From Jay Melvin.
I want to ask this, Trev, because I want you to answer this one first, because I'm curious to get your thoughts on this. Jay Melvin asks, do you think Cam Coleman has as much God-given talent as Jeremiah Smith? Not better necessarily as a player, but talent-wise.
Talent-wise, it's close. I think there's things that Jeremiah Smith naturally did better earlier in his football career. That, and Jeremiah Smith was being thrown to by Will Howard, a national championship winning quarterback, and Julian Sain, a Heisman Trophy finalist last year. Cam Coleman was being thrown to last year by Ashton Daniels, and the year before that, Jackson Arnold. So some of that is a little different. Now, if you ask me who I'm taking to build a roster, it's Jeremiah Smith 8 days of the week. But in terms of God-given talent, I would say it's close. I would still give the edge to Jeremiah Smith. But Jeremiah Smith was significantly more ready to come in and play as a true freshman than what Cam Coleman was. But similar body types, similar skill sets. Yeah, I would say God-given talent, it's close. But as far as like football readiness, it's Jeremiah Smith by a lot.
I think we're saying the same thing, Trevor. Physical talent, just God-given size, speed, explosiveness, all that, hands, length, catch radius, all that, I think they're pretty much the same. The difference for me is Jeremiah Smith has more natural receiver talent even than what Cam Coleman has. Cam's got to develop that stuff. He was more raw. Jeremiah Smith knew how to play the game of football the minute he stepped foot on campus. Cam had to learn it to a greater degree than Jeremiah did. So just pure God-given physical tools, I'd say, yeah, he's got as much as Jeremiah. Maybe he's not quite as strong. The one edge Jeremiah had is just natural strength. Jeremiah's a strong kid.
Yeah.
But it's Jeremiah just is a more natural football player than Cam Coleman. That's why he's got better hands. Cam doesn't catch the ball as clean as Jeremiah does. He's got good hands, but not as good as what Jeremiah has. So it's the football talent that separates him from Cam. And then the more Cam learns those things, then obviously the closer he gets. But that's what made Jeremiah so special. Jeremiah Smith is not the first 6'3" to 6'4", 200-pound guy that was really fast and could jump. Right? There's been a lot of those guys. That's not what made him a truly generational prospect. It's the fact that he has all that, plus he just knows how to play the game.
Yep.
I think that's what really separated him from some other top guys.
From Tom Redinger, to get Graham, Faison, and Greathouse on the field, would you run a lot of trips open with the tight end to the boundary or split out wide? Is there a lot you can do out of that with those three?
In theory, yes. I don't know that you're going to do that with this team. I don't know that you're going to want to put Cooper Flanagan or Ty Washington or James Flanagan in the boundary. Now, in 2 years, if, let's say you've got Graham, Greathouse, and let's say Elijah Burris is your next best receiver, or Bubba Frazier, or somebody like that, and Ian Premier's now your number one receiver, then I think you could do more of that. If you had Eli Raridan coming back, or Mitchell Evans, or a Tyler Eifert, I think you could certainly do that, Tom. So the reason I wouldn't do that a ton this year is just because I don't know that you have the tight end for that. Not that they're not good players, but it's a little bit of a different skill set. But I think all those guys can play the boundary in certain situations. You just have to alter how you're using your boundary. You just don't ask him to be Malachi Fields. But there's some film in 2015 that we could go back and watch. Who was the starting boundary at Notre Dame in 2015? It was Chris Brown, who's like $185, 6'1.5", $185, $190. He's smaller than Jaden Greathouse, and he's about the same size as Milin Graham. And he was the starting boundary on up to what at that time had been the most explosive offense in Notre Dame history at over 7 yards of play. So you just have to alter what you do. There's a lot of offenses where all three of those guys would have no problem being on the field together. Notre Dame's is just more of like that pro style where their boundary is just, you need more of a big guy there, ideally. But you can alter that, and Mike Denbrock has, when the personnel was not what he wanted, to make it work. And I would certainly find ways to make that work. There's going to be a lot of times over the next few years where you're like, I need to get, Graham, whether it's Graham, Frazier, and Caden Finley on the field together, or Frazier and Robinson and Graham on the field together, or Finley, Robinson, Julius Jones Jr. if he comes in there. I mean, there's going to be a lot of times where you're like, hey, we want to go that small package, and where we get a little bit more speed. And if Ian Premier's your tight end, then brother, do this. You know what I mean? Put him in the boundary and have those guys be in the slot or in the 3x1 or whatever. But there's also things you can do where one of those guys is playing in the boundary. And there's some things you can do with them: stops, comebacks, digs, quick game, screens as boundary receivers. But then a lot of other stuff is because Bama used to put Devontae Smith in the boundary a lot, and they would do a lot of like flood concepts, or they do like a double post and then bring Devontae backside on like a deep over. So if the double post wasn't there, it would clear out the top end coverage, and now you've got a guy chasing Devontae Smith across the field. Yeah, that's kind of stuff that any of those three guys could do as a boundary player. And so I think that looking at the makeup of your roster and saying, hey, we need to do some of that stuff, have some of those packages would would make a lot of sense for Notre Dame. Last one, Trevor.
From J. Melvin, BD, did you like Wingo coming out of high school? Brian Smith loved him. And do you like Nick Lanier in this cycle?
I haven't watched Nick Lanier. I'd have to go back and watch him, so I don't have an opinion on him. Regarding Ryan Wingo, yes, I liked him a lot coming out of high school, but the thing that I tried to tell everybody is he's not a day one impact player. He was very raw coming out of high school. But I wanted him in the Notre Dame class. I mean, this isn't like sour grapes. He didn't pick Notre Dame, say he wasn't that good. He was very good. He just was someone who's going to need time. And that's partly why I really like this Texas receiving corps, because now he's going into, is this going to be his junior year or sophomore year? He'll be a sophomore this year, correct? Ryan Wingo?
Yes.
He's going into his second year, and then as he goes into his third year, and he gets more and more kind of into his game than I think so. And apparently it's a different Wingo that they're talking about. But that's my thoughts on Ryan Wingo. Samoran Wingo, I didn't watch him much in high school, so I couldn't tell you that. He was, I believe, a Florida kid, and Brian Smith obviously would have seen him. But he was never a guy that was on Notre Dame's radar, really, as a legitimate target, so he's not a guy I broke down. I probably watched his highlights because I watched a lot of those kids' highlights, but it didn't catch my attention. So I didn't see him a whole lot in high school. So, sorry. I was responding to the wrong Wingo. It might help in the future that maybe put a first name on there a little bit there, Jay Melvin, and then that helps me out a little bit. So he did say he could have made it cleaner, but because we had a lot of questions about the Texas receiving corps as well. So that's why I thought it was that. My bad. All right, man, that'll do it.
Well, folks, that's going to do it for us here today on the Irish Breakdown Podcast, brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Now, the guys are going live tonight on IB Nation Sports Beat, talking about what's up next in the 2027 recruiting cycle, where Brian will be on with them at 5:05. And if you haven't gotten enough of the Dabo Swinney Notre Dame talk, they're also going to be talking about.
I'm going to be on at the 5:30 window today. The rest of the way, I'm going to be at 5:05. But today, they had to move it around a little bit. I'm going to be on at 5:30. Do you love it when you get not told those things before you're announcing it? They're like, you want me to announce it, and then you don't tell me. And then you make me look bad. That's my fault, folks. I did not tell Trevor the adjustment to the schedule. That's on me.
Regardless, Brian will be on tonight with the guys on IB Nation Sports Beat. So you will see him at some time. No, you'll see him at 5:30.
You should have hit me with the irregardless. Irregardless. I feel like that's when you want to say regardless, but you want to be mad when you say it. You say irregardless.
It adds a little bit of
on at some point in time
on it.
Yes,
I'm with you. Brian will also be back tomorrow at 1 p.m. to talk about the state of the program, talking about the defensive tackle unit with Sean Davis. I'm off the rest of the week, so you guys won't see me until Monday. I'm sure you're just absolutely shaken up about that, but I will be back on Monday afternoon with Brian. We'll continue some awesome off-season content. On your way out of this show, please be sure to hit that like, hit that subscribe, hit that notification bell. Be sure to share this podcast with your friends, family, anybody that you know loves Notre Dame and college football as much as you do. But as always, the best way to support what we do here is subscribe to the premium message boards at irishbreakdown.com. So until next time, that's Brian. I'm Trevor. We'll see you back here very soon on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.